Welcome back. We had a lively discussion yesterday and look forward to some more today. And we're going to start with Morgan Kelly. I saw her online, saw the slides earlier. She's going to talk to us about dynamic modeling and optimization in chemical processes and electrical markets. And I'll just point out that she's a CSGF alumnus. So it's another great example to see the impact of the graduate fellowship program. So Morgan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Oh, there we go. Okay. Hi, I'm Morgan. I finished my PhD last August, and this was kind of my project that was funded by CSGF. So the main motivation here for this project is in recent years, there's been like a high influx of these deregulated electricity markets. And so basically, this is what those prices look like. Essentially, during the daytime hours, our renewables are quite high, and that's because we have solar on the grid. And then overnight, these renewables drop as the sun goes down. So that's this red line on the bottom here. There we go. And so on the top, we have our grid demand, which unfortunately peaks slightly after when the renewables peak. And this is because we're getting home, it's the hottest part of the day, air conditioners are ramping up, we're maybe doing laundry or dishes or starting the oven, things like that. And so this gap between renewables availability and demand, I've labeled as the deficit here, and it actually directly drives electricity prices. So you can see here, the peaks are like fairly well lined up. And so this is kind of what happens in an extreme example I'll go over. So in February 2021, there was a really big winter storm in central Texas. So it was 140 hours below freezing and over 6.5 inches of snow in Austin, Texas, in the supposedly subtropical city. And so if we look at what happened on the grid in this extreme weather event, we can kind of see here. So the snow happened the night of February 14th. So I left the few days like leading up to it here in the graph. So you can see prices you can barely even see them on the graph. I think they were about like $17 per megawatt hour. And you see here our capacity line in red is kind of always tracing just above the load in black. That's why prices are able to stay low. If we look here on the 14th, when it started to snow, we see our load shoot up really fast and capacity goes up to meet it. But right around here, you can see that load actually outpaces capacity a bit, and the prices just absolutely shoot up. I think they got up to like $9,500 per megawatt hour at one point. And then here you see that the load actually drops, and it's not because people stopped using electricity, it's because the power went out. So they tried to do these rolling blackouts. Essentially, they turn off your power for 10, 20 minutes. To shuffle things around on the grid and keep the load low, but it was so cold that they couldn't actually turn the grid back on. So this kind of shows that these sort of rolling blackouts don't actually work in extreme weather situations, and they can also be very dangerous. So there were quite a few deaths in this winter storm, and it was pretty serious. So we can't really ask residential customers to kind of curb their usage, especially during extreme events, which are becoming more and more common. So we can kind of look to industrial consumers to change their habits, even just on a regular day. So the idea is, if we get an industrial consumer to basically overproduce when electricity is really cheap and renewables are high on the grid, and then make extra product to store, in which they can then use when electricity prices spike up, they can turn down their usage on the plant and actually shift the demand curve. So basically how this works is an industrial company, we have the planning layer, which basically forecasts demand of the product. To schedule when we're going to meet this demand, we take into account electricity prices and ambient conditions. From here, we send this to the control layer, which tells the plant what to do. So it will say, here's what you set the temperature at, or here's what you set your flow rate at, and things like that to get the desired power outcome. One of the challenges with things like this is that there are many different timescales here, so this becomes a really complicated computer programming problem. So overall, this is kind of what it's going to look like. If we shift when we use demand for an industrial consumer, we're basically going to shift the demand curve and help alleviate some stress on the grid. So in order to be able to do this, there's a few things. We need to make frequent scheduling changes. We need to account for process dynamics. This is because, sure, you can curb your power usage, but you might be exploding or overflowing something at the plant. So you want to make sure that you can actually make these changes safely. So you have to really accurately model the plant. So we make a few assumptions. We assume that we can store the product safely and effectively, and that we're able to make these fast transitions. So the requirements for our problem is that we want to account for plant dynamics and ideally solve the calculation in less than an hour. That's the rate at which electricity prices change. There's also a 15 and a 5-minute market. So under 15 minutes would be great as well. We're going to solve the problem as a mixed integer linear program, which basically means we make a series of decisions throughout the time period. And that's because that's what model the power grids are on. That's their format. And so we want to make sure that these models are able to link together. And there's powerful commercial solvers available for these as well. So I kind of already went over this, but basically, here's what's going to happen. This purple line here is the instructions that our optimal schedule is going to give to the plant. And the orange line is how the plant traces those instructions. And so you can see this is our step 1 here to go down. The next instruction is to step up for the following hour. And our plant hasn't actually settled yet. So that's why we need to make sure we have a really accurate model to predict what it's going to do, because our plant is no longer in steady state operation, which means we're basically not operating at the same level every day. So these things we need to make sure are really stable transitions. The struggle with these models is that they're highly nonlinear. They're stiff, which means they include multiple timescales, such as hours, minutes, seconds, and things like that, and they're very high dimensional. So to represent these, I've used 2 time grids. The first one is represented by index I, which is essentially every hour. And then index J is the minutes or seconds within each hour, just depending on the model. So this is kind of a zoom in on what these 2 levels look like. So the control layer basically tells the plant what to do, and the process will do the actions and feedback information to let it know kind of where the states are at. So to represent these multiple timescales, we use scale bridging models. These essentially bridge disparate timescales between scheduling and control. So essentially we trace, also I think I'm echoing, so maybe I don't know if somebody's not muted. But yeah, so basically the scheduling here, so the output from the scheduling level is traced to the total output from the plant. So this would be maybe like what levels we're going to operate at, so our flow rate or things like that, and the quality variables are how pure the product is. So we're able to actually create one model that's driven by data, so we can get data directly from the plant and fit a model on it. We don't need to use differential equations and things like that. So this is kind of the overview of what that problem looks like. So essentially we have our sub problems here, which would be every hour. And they're actually linked to the following hour with one constraint. So if I were to be walking across a room and the first minute ends and the second minute begins, our time is continuous, right? So I'm going to be in exactly the same spot that I was the previous minute, right when that second minute hits. But in programming, the time is not continuous. And so you have to actually tell the program where you are in the room, essentially. And so in this case, we have these complicating constraints, which essentially means that we have to solve this problem sequentially. So we solve for hour 1, we say, okay, where are we as we're walking across the room? Okay, we give that information here, and that's our initial condition for the following problem. This makes the problems really slow to solve because we can't do them all at once. So things like that. So essentially what we've done is we've removed these complicating constraints and we actually penalize them on the objective function. So now I'm walking across the room, the minute passes, I can be anywhere in the room, but the distance from where I am and where I should be is actually subtractive from the objective. So we found that like essentially we're penalizing basically our like invalidating of the constraints, and we're meeting those. And so now we can actually separate each subproblem here and solve each one independently. And that allows us to do parallel computing, and we can solve the problem much faster. So I won't get too into the weeds here on the math, but essentially we solve a relaxed subproblem, which means where all the constraints, the complicating constraints are gone. We calculate the violation of these constraints, so the difference between where I am and where I should be. And we penalize this on the objectives. So if our initial objective was to maximize J, which would be something like profit or things like that, now we're actually subtracting those errors in the states. And so there's actually a theorem that proves that the solution of the original problem is actually equivalent to the solution of the relaxed problem, so long as a solution exists. So that's huge. That means we can actually parallelize the problem without any penalties. So this is a small case study I did. This is a cryogenic air separation unit. So essentially your feed air comes in here, it gets compressed, it goes through a heat exchanger, and it's liquefied here. So it needs to be liquefied to be cryogenically separated essentially. And so our main products are liquid and gaseous nitrogen. Any product that's not used immediately is liquefied again and sent to storage. And so this is where that demand response comes in. So we can actually overproduce and store the product. The industrial gas sector is a really viable contributor for demand response because they account for about 2.6% of industrial electricity consumption. There's only one feed, which is air and readily available, plus electricity. And so it makes it really easy to zero in on the power usage. The longer time horizon you use with these demand response problems, the more savings you can have. So essentially, if you look at a 3-day time horizon, you can actually overproduce during day 1 for a spike you might see in day 3 if there's an extreme weather event coming. And so in that case, it just gives you a little bit more freedom. The only issue is that as we look forward and with more time, we actually get less accurate price estimations. So that's something we try to balance. So in all the problems today I'll be talking about, they're just a 3-day time horizon. And so the 4 power consuming units, there's a compressor and the liquefier. Those consume quite a bit of power, and the turbines slightly offset this. So this is what's actually driving our demand response. So look at the summary of the results. So the P1 problem is a full order model. So that means it was fluid dynamics, differential equations. So basically a full analytical model. That took about 95 hours to solve for a 3-day time horizon. So that is completely useless. And so the goal here was to try to speed that up with these scale bridging models that I talked about. So if we use a nonlinear scale bridging model, it took about 5 hours. That's a huge improvement from 95 hours, but it's still not where we want it to be. If we use these discrete scale bridging models with the discrete time points, and we use the parallelization, we actually get down to just over 7 minutes. And you'll see here, there's a little bit loss in the savings when we use these less accurate models, and that's because we need to impose back-off constraints. However, the slight loss in savings is like a very small price to pay for solving it in a reasonable amount of time. And one more thing to point out is that P3 and P4, which are the discrete scale bridging model and the relaxed scale bridging model, come to the same exact solution. The relaxed one actually just takes less time. And just to give an idea of how big these problems are, these discrete scale bridging model problems have 85,000 variables for the non-relaxed problem, plus 1,500 integer variables. This is just like a yes/no decision we're making. And continuous variables, it was 90,000 for the relaxed problem. And so you'll see, even though the relaxed problem has more variables, it still solves quicker, and that's just because of the parallel architecture of the problem itself. Drawing it back to the power requirements, we see that the overall energy use actually increases by 3%. This makes a lot of sense because we're now liquefying our extra product. However, we decrease peak demand by about 20%. So we can show that we actually make a pretty big dent in this power demand. And so here, if you look at the power consumption, electricity prices, you'll see that there are 2 peaks here. It goes right back down to the baseline when there's a small peak, and then it actually dips below the baseline here when we get the large peaks. And this reference line is just if we weren't to use demand response and we just had a completely constant operation level. So in the future, ASUs actually operate in a network, so these air separation units. So many of these would need to be combined, and as well as their locations and the time to get the product to the customer. And so that this actually will become quite a large network problem. So that solution time is really important. I also did a large scale case study. So in this one, it's still an air separation unit. There's more products now. So there's liquid and gaseous oxygen, argon, and liquid and gaseous nitrogen. So in this case, this is actually a true industrial process. So we had a year's worth of industrial data from a partner. And basically we had a data point for every second of the year for all of these variables. So it was a ton of data. So for this, we actually used an autoregressive model with extra term. That's what ARX is. It's essentially just like a standard whole zero model. So these U, that's the inputs, things like temperature, production rate, anything you can set yourself in the plant, and the output Y would be something you can't set, like the purity of the product and things like that. So this model looks a little bit different than the one I just talked about before. So this actually looks back several time points. So those complicating constraints, the continuity constraints, actually get a lot more complicated in this case. However, these models are entirely linear, and they can be fit better to this industrial data. So this is kind of where we started. We have a block angular structure of a real system, which means that at the end of hour 1, I'm exactly where I was, where I will be at the beginning of hour 2. So in that snap instant of time, nothing has changed. So these problems have one complicating constraint per time interval, and we're able to reformulate the nonlinearities pretty regularly. Now, if we look to the new model, the ARX model, we're actually looking back a number of points equal to the number of poles of the problem. So if we have a third order system, we're actually looking back not to just the last second of the previous hour, but the last 3 seconds. Just as an example. So that problem actually looks like this. There's a lot more overlap between these solution blocks, and then that gives us more complicating constraints. However, these problems are linear and they can be solved pretty quickly. So even though we have more complicating constraints, the problem structure actually lends itself a lot better to demand response. And so in that case, we do get some gains in solution time. This was something I found interesting when I was doing this. This is my first time working with real industrial data. And so our key challenge here was that nothing is perfect. And so our data-driven models actually inherited any measurement errors in the plant. So in this case, there were a few sensors that were off or biased a little bit. We can't really go back in time and get better data because this was actually a year's worth of data. So what we had to do was basically realize that like our mass balances aren't closing, not because there's a leak in the plant, but because the sensors aren't working. So a mass balance would essentially say that everything going into the system is coming out minus anything that's been lost or accumulated within the system. And so that case, like you put amount of air in and there's just a certain amount of oxygen in it, that same amount of oxygen should come out somewhere in the process. And that wasn't happening. And we found that it was due to some sensors. So what we did was we computed basically the errors in the mass balances, and we represented these with ARX models as well. So in that case, we're able to dynamically capture the sensor error, and we can get our mass balances to close. So if we look at the ARX model fits to these data, they're really good. So this is the normalized mean square error. So P1 through P3, these are the power consumption of the process. These are all the product flow rates here, and then this is a controlled variable. So you'll see here, here's just a plot of the airflow. Everything's been scaled, so these axes actually don't mean anything. But yeah, so you'll see it matches up pretty well with the industrial data, which is gray in the background. And yeah, then this line here is our train test split, essentially. So if we look at the solution of the problem, we get a few interesting things. So this first one is the flow of gaseous nitrogen. You'll see that it's ping-ponging basically between the upper and lower bounds. And this is actually a factor of using linear models. So we get this abrupt switching between upper and lower bounds, which can be really difficult for model predictive control systems to track. So the actual control system in the plant. What we can do to fix this is actually impose a rate of change constraint on variables that need it. So this is the flow of argon. Argon is probably the most expensive product. It's really hard to get. There's a very small concentration in the air that we breathe. And so if this is ping-ponging between the upper and lower bounds, the plant is just going to be going crazy. And that is a drawback of these scale bridging models, is that we lose just a little bit of model fidelity and we need to impose these back-off constraints. But yeah, here we'll see that the schedule is a little bit less predictable than the toy model I showed. So they're not exactly opposite of electricity prices. So there's more variables, and that's just because the model is like bigger and we have more things going on and more products. However, we did get an 8.9% savings compared to operating at a constant production rate for just 3 days. And that's huge. And our computation time was actually under 2 minutes for this, which shows that these secondary linear models are actually really, really good at solving these problems quickly. In practice, it's pretty intense to fit these models to a new set of data every time, especially if a plant maybe doesn't keep their data historian for a full year. So what we propose is to actually use a model that exists, start it on a new plant, and use these parameter updates to fine-tune the model for the new plant. So essentially, we have our optimal scheduling problem here with our model from our previous plant. We see, okay, what did that model think the plant was going to do? We feed the instructions to the plant and get what the plant actually did, and use the difference between these to basically calculate these new parameters. So this is a way that we can get around that heavy, intense fitting process. And just a way to fit these models quicker to a new plant. So the idea is if a company was to adopt this, they would have the original model and they could kind of grow this with their other plants. And this is what this looks like in practice. So this is the model before we did this parameter updating. So we took a new section of the data that was not fitted from a different area, used the same model on it, said, okay, there's not very good fit at all. We did this parameter update and we got a much improved fit here after this vertical line with the Kalman filter. So this is an additional study we did as well. So this is information on renewables availability for a 3-day time span in July in California. So this is the total power grid mix. We see renewables here at the bottom, nuclear, thermal, imports, and hydropower. So we can look at the breakdown of renewables here and see that it's mostly driven by solar and wind, which makes sense because it's California. If we look here at the greenhouse gas emissions on the grid, so this is taken using the CO2 equivalent for these sources, we see that there is some correlation between grid emissions and electricity prices. So we see that the peaks start at the same time and the grid emissions one actually carries over for quite a long time period. So something we did was to basically look at what does demand response do to the grid side emissions. So in this side, the DR is our traditional demand response, where we minimize our operating costs. EMP is emissions minimizing production. So instead of minimizing operating costs, we seek to minimize emissions. And the reference problem is just if we operate at a constant level. So if we look at our CO2 emissions here, we see that demand response consistently lowers CO2 emissions compared to the reference problem, which is actually really cool because we're able to reduce our emissions while also saving money. On the flip side, we see that if we look at our 3-day operating costs, that actually when we seek to minimize emissions, we can increase the operating costs during summer months. And that's because there's just like a little bit more disparity between prices and emissions since there's more extreme temperatures. So this is something to consider as well. And again, these emissions are grid-based emissions. They're not from the chemical plant directly. So this would be directly related to what sort of power sources are on the grid at that time. So for conclusions and future outlook, DR has a huge potential for mitigating this grid instability and reducing emissions, and it will also save companies electricity costs. And this isn't just for during extreme weather events. This can be just on a normal day. It involves little to no capital expenditure, so there's primarily changes in operating habits. In this problem, we assumed that the storage tank could hold a day and a half of operation, which is pretty standard for these air separation units. Recent advances in computer technology models and algorithms actually enable efficient solution of these problems. Even during the 5 years of my PhD, I saw significant improvements in computation just by getting new computers. So that is something to keep in mind. So for future work, there's a few applications outside of industrial plants. So time of use electricity pricing for residential and commercial entities is already being done. It can be really bad during extreme weather events like the winter storm. Residential users who actually were on demand response plans got these massive electricity bills. So that's just something to consider, that there is a risk in this, especially if you need to be operating all the time, such as a house. They need air conditioning and heat. So maybe a demand response plant isn't great for them. It does have a potential to play a role in remote computing tasks. So for example, when you do a credit card transaction, the bank actually processes these all overnight. So we can think, is there a better time of day to do this? This is a large compute task. So perhaps that can be done. Renewables are high on the grid. Another thing is maybe we can send these compute tasks to other places where there's more renewable energy. And so we can kind of do a mapping problem to figure out where the most optimal place to run these compute tasks. So I'd like to thank my research groups and the DOE CSGF family and funding. Yeah, I'll take any questions.
Questions? Yeah, Rick.
How would you incorporate incentive models, kind of turning this around to determine the values that would change behavior?
Incentive models for companies or?
For any of the consumers?
Yeah, I mean, the incentive models are there if you do time of use pricing, right? You can save quite a bit of money by doing this. In terms of reducing your emissions, I don't think there is. So if we calculate like the amount of money you might lose by reducing emissions and using these higher electricity prices, it's actually quite high compared to the carbon tax. So I don't think there's room for that. But I do think if you're minimizing cost, you might inherently just lower your emissions. And so I think for industrial companies, like the bottom line would be just like minimizing your operating cost.
There we are. It's Vindican. Actually, just flywheeling off of that, I have this vague recollection that the power company in Hawaii, or a power company in Hawaii, set up a plan for rewarding people for installing solar power and generating electricity to offload the grid. But they rewarded them in such a way that eventually it was uneconomic for the grid to operate, because the solar power that was being generated, they were paying more money to the consumers who were generating solar power than they couldn't afford to keep operating themselves. I'm sure I'm messing this up. It's like telling a joke with a bad punchline. But I do wonder how one would use the techniques that you've just described to make sure that you've chosen the right kind of incentive reward model to keep the system stable.
Yeah, I mean, Hawaii is an interesting problem, right? Because they're not really connected to another grid. So most of the US, like if you overproduce on solar power, now Texas and California do have their own power grids, so they also run into this. So yeah, essentially electricity prices will dip negative and they're paying people to use electricity at that point. I don't know if you guys have seen that happen.
This
go ahead.
Like negative interest.
Yeah, essentially. And so, and another thing is like if all these companies are doing this, like obviously the prices are going to shift because your demand is now shifting. So then it becomes like a huge game theory problem as well.
Yeah, that whole dynamic of the notion that the business model of utility companies have been predicated on growth of energy demand is that, yeah, all of these things bring that into stark relief. And we have a question from one of our committee members who's online. Krista, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks. Hi, Morgan. Thank you for a wonderful talk. That was great. I'm interested in terms of the application of these methods to other areas across the industry. Have you thought about that application and where has it worked well in other scenarios?
Yeah, so we did an ammonia plant. Ammonia is another really electricity intensive process. So that one was quite lucrative. There's actually, I think it's a steel plant that actually does already use demand response, like in real life. And yeah, we've done some residential ones and some commercial ones, but it really makes the most sense for industry to do this as well. And my PI, he actually worked at an air separation company. And so that's kind of where this example came from.
Okay, Sylvia.
Hi, Morgan. Great work. I have a question about applying the results from one plant to another. Is that something that you have tried? And have you considered maybe taking samples from, different samples and combining them into one model that then you can apply to, other plants?
Yeah, I think that's the general idea. So we only have like one plant's worth of data. So we actually kind of generated, I won't say fake data because it was based on the original data to just see how it might happen if we had a plant that was like slightly different, operating from the same company essentially. So there's still a similar type of process going on. And that's what that Kalman filtering was, to kind of see like how we could update the models. But yeah, I think that's where this is going. So this is a multi-university project with Lindy. And so there's like a bunch of teams working on this, and we were working on the data-driven part of the model. So that project is actually continuing with them as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for the questions, Morgan. Great work. Thanks for the presentation this morning.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm reminded to remind all of us that we are bound by Virginia state law, that I inform you we are recording this meeting. So just be aware of that. And I don't mean that as be a prelude to the introduction of our next speaker, totally unrelated, but I'm delighted, as Barb mentioned yesterday, to welcome the new director of the Office of Science. And so delighted you're here. Look forward to the conversation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you everybody for inviting me to join you all today. Very exciting presentation and work, Morgan. I don't know if she's still on the call, but exciting to be able to hear also the work that, the future of this field, the young folks are doing. Very cool. Yeah, and I also want to thank you all for taking time out of your very, very busy lives to serve in this committee. Your committee and all the 6 other similar advisory committees in the Office of Science are extremely essential part of our engagement with the scientific community, with the breadth of it all, and that we support. And they help us ensure that the voices of the scientific community are represented and guiding the scientific programs and directions that we're leading out of the Office of Science. I am very delighted and honored now to be leading the DOE's Office of Science. Super exciting. I'll never get tired of saying this. The U.S. is largest supporter of basics research in the physical sciences and the host of world-leading capabilities in its stewardship of 10 of the department's national labs and our 28 user facilities. Of course, I started as a director in this role at an exciting time in history, in particular for your field, but also for the world, just in time for the start of the exascale era, with the frontier at Oak Ridge National Lab having recently officially been confirmed as the first exascale computer to sit atop of the top 500 list. Obviously, this is an incredibly great accomplishment for the Advanced Scientific Computing Research Program and, of course, the entire community. Our core mission at the Office of Science, which is to deliver the scientific discoveries and major scientific tools that will transform our understanding of nature and the advance of energy, economic, and national security, the U.S., all of that remains foundational to our vision for the Department of Energy. The Advanced Scientific Computing Research Program is a very important and essential component of achieving all of these missions. as a relatively rather newly confirmed director, I want to start by telling you all a bit about my vision and goals for the Office of Science, followed by some discussion of how we hope and expect the advanced scientific computing research will contribute to accomplishing many of the aims that we've laid out. As you know, the Office of Science is focused on leading the nation in scientific discovery across all areas in the physical sciences and technology development to address critical, timely, and existential issues having to do with climate change, with goals to accelerate innovation in the clean energy space and advance our understanding of matter and the universe through the lenses of inclusive excellence and in ways that will continue to promote economic growth. Key to realizing all of this vision is sustained support for scientific research and innovation across our broad portfolio, including enabling facilities and infrastructure that is needed to do the science. Let me be clear from the start that as director, I am fully committed to support and advance all of Office of Science's programs. Each program has a crucial role to play in achieving the Office of Science mission and meeting all of our priorities. In many of my early conversations as director of the Office of Science, I've made it a point to emphasize my commitment to world-leading discovery science across all of the Office of Science scientific portfolio, and to expand the Office of Science role in advancing emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, quantum information sciences, and microelectronics, technologies that enable advances in all areas of scientific research. Research supported by ASCAC and carried out by this community make invaluable contributions across all of these priority areas. Scientific advances also increasingly rely, obviously, on the collection, storage, and analysis of massive amounts of data. This is why, as I assume you all agree, advanced computing and AI have become even more so crucial for enabling progress in all areas of science and technology, and why ASCAC plays a key role in the scientific research ecosystem. Exascale computing, for example, holds significant promise for enabling simulations, artificial intelligence, and computationally complex data science to enable scientific research across all domain areas supported by the Office of Science. Exascale computers and the software developed to efficiently utilize them are key to unlocking tomorrow's scientific discoveries and developing many new technologies. Likewise, we must maintain healthy stewardship of the Office of Science national labs, including the infrastructure, support of the national labs in their efforts to evolve to meet the current and future challenges. This includes expanding the role that our labs as regional hubs can play for creating economic opportunities for realizing community benefits through partnership between DOE, state and local governments, universities, and the private sector. Achieving the administration's goals for basic and use-inspired research, especially in the priority areas the current administration has laid out to address climate change, requires not just continuing research programs for climate change and clean energy, but also strengthening the relationships between the Office of Science and the Applied Energy offices. We always look forward to working with our colleagues in the offices under both the Undersecretary of Science and Innovation and the Undersecretary for Infrastructure through new joint strategy teams that are intended to help build and leverage the many relationships that we have. And we welcome, of course, input from this community and our scientific communities as a whole on all of our efforts on these areas. In this way, we can advance the department's climate change and clean energy missions while continuing to expand our Office of Science-wide efforts to address community-focused needs. I'm telling you this because I think the ASCAC mission is central to many of DOE's clean energy and climate efforts. The investments and accomplishments in basic research that are enabling research capabilities, including in the advanced computing, AI, and simulations, have provided foundational critical knowledge that enable development and deployment of many clean energy technologies. And of course, one of the most important applications of our new exascale computing capability is higher resolution and more advanced climate models, including the Office of Science groundbreaking Energy Exascale Earth System Model, or E3SM. The role of fundamental science in addressing global scale challenge like climate change is indispensable for long-term success. Obviously, where the future of our planet depends on. Another continuing priority, one that is particularly important to me, is increasing accessibility of Office of Science funded efforts by promoting principles of belonging, access, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or what I like to call be a Jedi in everything that we do. Doing so means working closely with all our communities, with our supported national labs, researchers, institutions, projects, and small businesses. And it means continuing to integrate the principles of Be a Jedi into our relevant practices and policies. New initiatives like the Office of Science Reaching a New Energy Science Workforce, or RENEW, will significantly expand training opportunities for undergraduate and graduate students from underrepresented and underserved groups. I'm pleased that OSCAR has issued a new funding opportunity announcement through the RENEW program that will bring talented young people that may have previously been overlooked or underserved into the science research ecosystem. The Computational Science Graduate Fellowship Program, which has been a crucial pipeline for developing skilled workforce in the computational science and engineering fields now for 31 years, has been recruiting more diverse cohorts in recent years as well. Particularly recently, has made incredible strides with respect to recruitment of women. Personally, it was a privilege to attend the poster presentation for the CSJF program earlier this week, where I was able to talk to students, and with Christine, we went around and heard about poster presentations on a number of areas, including QIS, work related to ocean dynamics, climate, genomics, and many, many others. Very exciting. I look forward to the Office of Science leading and training and empowering and continuing to lead in diversifying the STEM workforce for the future. Likewise, science and technology must serve the needs of society. Initiatives like the Justice 40 that the Biden administration has laid out will ensure that the Office of Science and the Department overall will be committed to serving communities most at risk. Achieving our lofty expectations in broadening participation requires similarly lofty expectations in how and to whom we communicate our science, and how obviously is a very important issue here. We want to develop strategies to communicate more effectively about the success of our scientific communities within DOE, with Congress, and with the public. Speaking of success, I think I should mention the National Virtual Biotech Lab, a coordinated effort across all 17 labs, which was incredibly, immensely successful in advancing our understanding of COVID-19 and supporting development of life-saving solutions in this current global challenge that we're all facing with COVID-19. The world-leading OSCAR-stewarded high-performance computing resources at DOE user facilities were invaluable tools in rapidly surveying the landscape of existing drugs in order to identify candidates more quickly for COVID therapeutics and vaccine. They were employed for epidemiological modeling that provided crucial information to decision makers for both short-term and long-term strategy and planning. We all have a lot to be proud of, given that these computing assets were also used to model protein binding interactions, thus playing a key role in the development of the vaccine that has moved us back towards some measure of normalcy, right? And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the role that our colleagues at our agencies, in universities, and in the private sector that stepped up early in the pandemic to participate in the COVID-19 HPC consortium and make their own computing resources available to researchers to start more quickly addressing the many unknowns we were faced at the time. This experience has distilled for us that we must be prepared to respond quickly and robustly to future crises. We're now moving to develop additional capabilities for biopreparedness. Programs across our portfolio, including and especially OSCAR, would be needed to support efforts in biopreparedness, as well as other research areas to support a range of emergency situations. We also want to expand interagency engagement more broadly to help meet administration priorities by advancing partnerships with other agencies to maximize federal R&D investments to the mutual benefit of DOE and the broader US research ecosystem. To take just one example of the sort of engagement we hope to build upon, ASCAC leads DOE participation in the National Quantum Initiative, collaborating with NSF, NIST, DoD, and other federal agencies. This whole of government initiative aims to ensure continued American leadership in quantum information science, and ASCAC plays a central role. By working collaboratively, we can achieve the greatest impact for the nation in this very critical area. Finally, as Office of Science collaboration should extend beyond our nation's borders in a responsible manner so that we can advance the administration's priorities through international partnerships while maximizing access to science and ensuring research security. Of course, it takes everyone working together to meet these ambitious goals. Only through community-driven strategic planning activities can we arrive at the next set of scientific priorities for the nation and the world. That's why I'm here personally to thank you all and tell you how excited we are that you're holding these advisory committee meeting, which is so very important and really critical for the scientific community and the advancement of science overall. Advanced scientific computing research plays a crucial role in meeting the Department of Energy's and the nation's science and technology goals. Today, scientists supported by ASCAC are increasingly working together to make advances in critical and emerging technologies, including high-performance computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, QIS, and quantum computing, and high-speed, high-capacity data networks. The recent accomplishments in exascale computing have to be emblematic of ASCAC's rapid progress on these important research areas and technologies. I, for one, certainly look forward to seeing the first results enabled by Frontier reported at supercomputing this fall. This exascale system will act as a multiplier too, accelerating progress in many related areas. For example, these systems hold great promise for accelerating AI development, enabled training on previously unattainable data sets, and offering new opportunities to merge AI and advanced simulation in innovative ways. ASCAC is moving quickly to provide access on Frontier to projects sponsored by other federal agencies and industry, such as work Rick Arthur described at this meeting yesterday. Broadening the community that shares in the excitement and especially in the benefits of exascale computing is a really important goal. To that end, the Office of Science and NNSA national laboratories are participating with minority-serving institutions for the AI for Science and Security workshops. Likewise, the Office of Science has established an impressive collection of QIS centers, test beds, and research efforts that will engage with minority-serving institutions through the Renew initiative that I described earlier. I believe strongly that broadening participation must be inclusive of all groups and institutions that are currently underrepresented and underserved in our portfolio. HBCUs and other MSIs, as well as institutions and states that have not traditionally attracted significant research funding to tap into the talent across America to meet our ambitious goals. I urge each and every member of this community to take meaningful roles to address these topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion and workforce development. I personally think we all have a responsibility to play a really critical role here. We all have incredible careers in science that we love, thanks to publicly supported funding. And it's a small way that we can actually make sure that we're giving back to that public that has supported and enabled our careers. In addition to building and supporting a diverse STEM workforce, it is also critical for us to maintain our support for facility operations and construction projects to keep the org leading in the face of intensifying competition from overseas. This community will be essential in helping us understand what our scientific facilities need in the years ahead and ensuring that they have the resources to continue producing world-leading science for DOE's missions and the broader science and technology goals of our nation. The national labs now have a request for information out to US vendors to plan for capabilities beyond the first exascale system. The EU, of course, has a rich history of partnering with industry on mutually beneficial research that ensures US leadership in addressing the challenge of scientific simulation while making US companies more competitive. As Congress considers legislation for strategic investments in this area, we are optimistic that ASCAC and our national labs will continue to play a leading role at the forefront to advance scientific computing. I look forward to seeing the results of your exercise and the global vision the community has for the future of US advanced scientific computing research. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today. And I think we have a few minutes and I'm happy to take some questions.
Well, thank you very much for those thoughtful remarks. Questions or comments from the committee? Well, I'll start with one. And I appreciate your, as I said, thoughtful comments. In a world awash in change, how can we best help you?
Thank you. But that was, I appreciate your kind comments about my remarks, but that was also a very thoughtful question. I think what will really be helpful for us is, we look towards you all for guidance and what is it that we should be doing, but also prioritizing. Obviously for me as the new director, I'm working closely and with the wonderful team at the Office of Science that have enabled and supported you all for a long period of time. And it's always helpful to hear not just the kind of the wonderful things we could be doing to advance science and technology and contribute to all the areas, but also prioritization is a key thing, because we all would like more funding to go towards science, but we're working with top lines that are set by the people above our pay grades, let's just say. And it would be really helpful to hear from you all, first of all, the prioritization of the things that we should be focusing on, but also innovative ideas, perhaps based on your own experiences in your own institutions or fields. How can we advance these goals for especially broadening participation that are clear administration's goals? I think it's also really important to make sure that we are we're at a point in time, I think it's fair to say that we cannot ignore climate change. It doesn't matter if you're a scientist who works in the climate space like I am, or you're a computational science who's not necessarily directly related to climate, right? One way or another, our lives are impacted, our future and the future of our field and the technologies that we want to develop has to consider climate change going forward. And so to me, it would be very wise to think about these topics, both because we know the administration has set them as priorities. We know there's going to be funding, and there is funding being directed towards these efforts. And the scientific fields as a whole would all do ourselves a favor if we think about how can we contribute to this conversation? How can we make sure that science is embedded in a lot of these efforts going on within the agency and across the interagency space, because again, it's a national priority at this point. So across all of those areas would be really helpful, and we're really looking forward to hear the results of your exercise. Thank you.
Ben?
So as usual, a poorly formulated question. I'm thinking about this period in which computational X is becoming significant for many different values of X. I'm wondering, how do we use the DOE investment in high performance computing to extend the application to what I'll call non-traditional problems? And here's what I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm.
We all seem to fall into the shiny object syndrome, and so that and machine learning and quantum computing everybody's all excited about that, Bitcoin, and yes, I won't even go there. So the first presentation that we got today showed a really interesting example of how analysis led to a better understanding of how to use demand response to achieve certain results. So here's my poorly formulated question. There must be other things that are part of our social and economic environment that might be subject to good quality computational analysis, but which don't come to our attention because they're not shiny objects. And I don't know to what extent the current programs at DOE would help us uncover opportunities to use computational power to solve problems that are not necessarily sexy, but would make a big difference.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important consideration. I mean, I try to answer this question, but my guess is Barb will probably have a much better answer for this than I, because of her experience and not just leading this program, but also engagement in a number of cross-cutting initiatives and contribution from the program to think about not just the development of computational sciences and advancement in your field, but also how computational science as a tool is advancing and contributing to many, many of the other areas that we support. I wonder if Barb, you want to take that?
Thanks, Christine. What I would add is I think this is one of the benefits of the computational science graduate fellowship program, which is what you've seen here, is that's where we get a lot of, especially when you have the students take applied math and computer science along with their domain, then it kind of opens their eyes. Well, what if I try this? And what if I, so I think that's been a great, help in bringing some of the innovative ideas to the forefront. The other thing I would say is the facilities all have outreach programs, and especially at Oak Ridge, I highlight their industrial outreach program, where they brought in a small trucking firm a number of years ago, and we modeled putting panels on the bottom of the truck to save energy. And so, and another example is they brought in a small insurance firm, because a lot of people had modeled what the impact of flooding from rivers were, but they weren't modeling the impact of flooding from cement. And so these are novel ideas that we're bringing in through our industrial, facilities, through the industrial outreach program, through a computational science graduate fellowship. And the other thing we have, I'm looking at Rich Arthur, is our SBIR program, where we have one of the topics is how can you take the software that we've developed in our SIDAC program, our BASE program, or an ECP, and have a small business use it to maybe help other small businesses. So those are just 3 examples of things that I can think of off the top of my head. Robert, go ahead.
Well, no, I just had a sort of different area and a very broad one that I always end up thinking about in this context. The DOE and the Office of Science managed to do big things that nobody else can do as sustained efforts over long periods of time. And the one that just came to mind for obvious reasons is the Exascale initiative, where I remember in 2010, when I was previously on ASCAC, we wrote the report, the summary report that said, yes, you should do Exascale, with a graph that said there was this wonderful set of a few years of opportunity where we could lead the world dramatically and easily. And and it's all kind of true, except for those few years where we could have jumped in at the beginning. And now it's 12 years later, and we've seen the first fruition. So there's a great part of that story and a tough part. The great part is that it really ended up being a sustained effort over long enough to have something happen. And this happens all the time, I think, with other facilities and labs. I'm just talking about the one that I know about. But it's over the course of that, it was a rough go, particularly in the beginning, to be able to commit enough resources to get the partners and so forth. And so whatever we all can do to make that more routine and sustainable and countable, and I think it also incredibly well applies in the workforce in Be a Jedi area, that the people and the goals need to be sustained over time. rather than short programs.
I hear you. I'm 100% in agreement with everything that you said. Obviously, every once in a while, we face tough times with the budget. Things a little outside our control, obviously. But let's remember that right now, we're not at that time. We are actually at a time where we have incredible support for the science mission as a whole, and even to enable facilities and other things that we would all like to do. So this is an incredibly important time that could help us set the stage for many years to come. And let's just work together and figure out the best way we can take advantage of this moment and this opportunity that we have right now, so that we can all get the resources that we need to keep pushing the science frontier forward. With that, I should acknowledge that we have another meeting across town that we have to get to, but I really appreciate you all and thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. We're really grateful. All right. Our next talk is about AI at Argonne. And so looks like the slides are up. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. I just want to confirm that you can see the slides and you can hear me well.
Yes, your slides are though in presenter mode, so you might want to see if you can make the main display the one that we see.
Sure. Does that work?
That's perfect. Great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm Venkat Vishwanath from Argonne National Laboratory. I'm at the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, and I'll be talking about the AI test beds that we have deployed here at ALCF at Argonne National Laboratory. These test beds have really helped us understand some of the novel architectures and how they can really benefit science. And I'll be covering the types of architectures that we have, the systems that we have deployed, the public systems that the systems that we have made public to users, and the science that we have enabled, among others. So again, thank you very much for having me here today, and I'm really excited to be here. So Argonne National Laboratory and the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility is a US Department of Energy Office of Science facility where we offer world-class computing resources to the open science community. Our systems really enable us to tackle challenging scientific problems that combine simulation, data, and learning to really come up with novel discoveries. And we have different allocation programs such as Insight, ALCC, and the Director's Discretionary Allocation to get to use these facilities here. To just provide you a brief overview of ALCF, we first started deployed the IBM Blue Gene L system in 2004. We continued the Blue Gene family, which were many core processors. So we deployed the Intrepid system in 2007. The Mira system in 2012, which was Blue Gene Q system, followed by the Theta supercomputer in 2017, which is still in production. We upgraded Theta to use to an NVIDIA DGX A100 based partition in 2020. And we have recently deployed Polaris. And what I'm really excited about is the Aurora system that we are in the process of installing. Along this timeline, we've also deployed other systems over here. So we formed the JLSC, which is the Joint Lab for System Evaluation, together with our Math and Computer Science division. And this was then expanded to the entire lab. We deployed the AI testbed in 2020, and this we started off with the Cerebrus CS1 system, and I'll talk about the various systems we have deployed, including systems from Sambanova, Grok, GraphCore, and Intel Habana. In 2021, we also deployed an edge testbed. This was also done in collaboration with the Math and Computer Science division, and it supports both edge compute as well as various sample devices such as cameras, microphones, and sensors to really understand future facilities and testbeds that we need to deploy in future. So Aurora is the system that I'm very excited about. We are currently installing this. We expect this to provide a peak performance of over 2 exaflops in double precision. This system is is in collaboration with Intel and HPE. It's an accelerated system where we will have over 10,000 nodes, where each node will have 6 Intel Ponte Vecchio GPUs. And the nodes are interconnected with an HPE Slingshot interconnect. We expect to have over 10 petabytes in aggregate for system memory. And one of the other key novel aspects of this is the DAOS object-based storage, which will be the production storage system for Aurora. Very familiar programming models such as OneAPI, OpenMP, among others, will be available for users, and MPI will be available to scale out. And in the areas that I work in, which is in data science and learning, we will have Python-based environments, machine learning and deep learning frameworks that we are familiar on other systems will work on Aurora. So Aurora is a system that we are very excited and will enable us to do really novel science. To just give you a snapshot, we have the Aurora Early Science Program, which really helps us, which brings on early applications that can fully exploit the scale of Aurora. We expect many of these applications would be the first to apply for the large allocations such as Insight. And as part of this program, they help us tease out the software stack, any issues in the hardware software stack, so that we can really scale applications when we go into production. This figure shows us the 10 projects in data and learning. We have 15 ESP projects, which includes 5 applications in simulations, 5 in data, and 5 in learning. As you can see, among the 10 applications, they really cover a wide space, and it really couples together simulations, data analytics, and learning to really do novel science on systems such as Aurora. We've been working very closely with these applications for past number of years to really ensure that the architecture, both the software and hardware, meets the needs of these applications, among others. And as you can see, we have a very diverse set of applications to ensure that our software stack is robust and the architecture is very robust. So as you've seen, both on the previous slide, we are witnessing a very large surge of scientific machine learning applications where science teams are using either surrogate models to optimize part of their simulation so that they can accelerate the time to solution. We have teams that are using data-driven models. We witness this in a lot of inverse problems, such as in cosmology and in high energy physics, where They're leveraging data that they obtain from experiments and observations and are using AI to build models. We're also seeing cases where AI is being used to really ensure what kind of experiments. This could be both at an experimental facility or even in terms of simulations. If you're trying to really search through a space or ensemble, you can do more intelligent ensembles using simulations, using AI to really improve the search of the space. So having seen this, our goal is to really understand the kind of infrastructure that we need to facilitate these wide array of new scientific machine learning and science application workflows and build infrastructures and facilities to really meet these needs. And I'll be really diving towards efforts that we have in this direction. So the key goal for us is to really understand how do you design these future facilities, which are coupled together with experimental facilities, together with edge devices, and you have a wide number of simulations and data-driven models, among others, that need to run on it. So you can think about AI accelerators that could be resident at an experimental facility. It could be at the edge between experiments as well as a compute facility, so they could be at the border. These accelerators could be sitting on a node of a supercomputer, so it could be on each node. You could consider having a disaggregated system where you have racks of these AI accelerators that are connected to the main supercomputer over the network. So our key goal is to really think about how do you design facilities that meet the needs of science applications? And these are a few examples here. So towards this goal, we've been doing a pathfinding effort where we are working to really evaluate a number of AI accelerators and really understand how can we effectively couple these with current supercomputers and future machines, and really design national user facilities based on these novel and new use cases. So as part of this effort, we've been working with a number of AI accelerators to really understand the maturity of their hardware, as well as their software stack for science. And how do we take these systems that have been designed by different vendors and really integrate them into a facility? And finally, how do you really run science on these systems at scale? This is our overall vision of the AI pathfinding, and I'll be discussing more of these. So towards this vision, we have developed and designed the ALCF AI testbed. As part of the testbed today, we have 5 different systems. We have the Cerebrus CS2, we have the SambaNova data scale system, we have a graph core system, the Intel Habana and Graph. Cerebrus and SambaNova are now available for allocations for users. And the approach that we take is we work with a variety of vendors. We initially start investigating a node or 2 nodes to really understand the efficacy for science. Based on our evaluations and early user experience, we then graduate them, you could consider that, to building half a rack or a rack scale systems, if not more. And once we work with users to identify how effectively can they use these for science and how we can take these systems and better integrate them into facilities, Our next goal is to graduate them to a stage where we can build larger scale systems out of these. So the goal of the AI testbed is, again, it's an infrastructure for next generation hardware accelerators for science applications. It really provides a platform to evaluate how usable are these for HPC science applications. And again, our goal is to understand how to really integrate them for future science facilities. Before I go into some more details about these accelerators, I just wanted to dive a little deep into data flow architectures. So if you look at the systems that we've deployed, many of them are based on data flow architecture. And what you see on the top, let me use my cursor here. So what you see on the top here is, there you go, is a common kind of a machine learning problem that you see, where you have a convolution operation, you pool, you apply a pooling operator, you apply another convolution operator, and then you apply some kind of a normalization to sum it. So data flow architectures are very general purpose. They can really tackle any general purpose computation as well. So if you do a comparison with a GPU-based system, what you would take is each of these operators or kernels, such as the convolution operator, pooling, conv2, norm. These are different kernels. And what you would do is you would launch these kernels, ship the data, perform the operations, store the data back. It could either be on cache, or depending on the capacity, come back to to the GPU memory. And then you would launch the next kernel. So this is the kind of operation at a very high level that you do on systems such as GPU-based accelerators. Now, of course, you can optimize this by fusing different kernels together. So you could take your con1D operation or 2D together with pooling and make a single kernel that you launch on these systems. So there are several optimizations you can do. But the key execution model is that you launch kernels, you ship data, you compute on it, and you ship data back. Now, you have various optimizations on where you store these results to speed up computation. Data flow architectures take a different path, and data flow architectures have been around for quite some time. I have had the pleasure of working with Professor Gao when he was a visiting faculty, and he would really provide us insights on how data flow architectures existed in the 80s, 90s, and the challenges that it faced. And he was really excited to see some of the data flow architectures that exist today. So to give you an idea of data flow architectures, what you do is now you take each of these kernels that exist, and you basically map them onto the device. So you lay them spatially on the device, and you feed these samples or the data through the first kernel. And as it computes, the output is then fed into the next kernel. So the data remains on chip, and it really tries to reduce kernel launch latencies or even reduce the memory traffic in this case. So this is kind of a brief overview of data flow architectures. And I mentioned this because some of the novel AI systems and architectures tend to use data flow and other derivatives of this. So here are the systems that we have today as part of our testbed. We have the Cerebras CS2, like a Sambanova data scale system, the Grok, GraphCore, and Habana Gaudi. And here is a table that just compares them with an NVIDIA A100. I'll just highlight maybe a couple of key examples here. Cerebrus, the CS2, is a wafer scale engine. So instead of taking chips and taking a wafer and making several chips, what Cerebrus has done is taken the entire wafer and come up with a novel way to program at a wafer scale. So the CS2 consists of close to 2.6 trillion transistors. It has around 85,000 cores with 40 gig of on-chip SRAM memory, and it can achieve close to 5.7 petaflops of FP16. Just to give you another example, the Sambanova Cardinal SN10, which is a reconfigurable data scale unit, has around 640 programmable compute units, programmable memory units with over 300 megabytes of SRAM. Most of these systems also have worked on a way to interconnect several of them, both on a node. So you can take 8 of the Sambanova accelerators and connect them on a node. And they have, they're working on techniques by which now you can connect several of these nodes together. One key insight is a lot of the I would say what makes these systems really powerful is a compiler, which lets you think about a model that can span multiple of these chips together. So instead of a user or a developer having to reason about how to take a model and run it to leverage several different accelerators, there is some notion in the compiler on how to take these models and really span multiple chips. I would say that data flow architectures are really impressive. I do also want to mention that if you have operations that are very data dependent, here is where data flow architectures are challenged. So if your graph really depends on features of the data, data flow architectures need to statically compile the code and need to have a global view in advance. In terms of the software stack, these systems that I have mentioned support a wide variety of deep learning frameworks, such as PyTorch and TensorFlow that we tend to use. I'll mention that Grok is a system that currently provides support for inference, while you can do training and inference on the other systems. So my next goal is to really walk through some of the interesting science that we have done on these systems and the science accomplishments, and I'll follow that up by really discussing about how we can compare and reason about these systems. I'll follow that up with our outreach efforts that we've done to really educate the user community to really use these systems, as well as some thoughts of challenges that we have faced, our experiences, and ongoing work. So we've seen a wide variety of novel science accomplished, ranging from cancer drug response to imaging sciences. This is the BRAC peak analysis, to tokamak fusion reactor operations, being able to run models to evaluate the efficacy for such reactor controls, to various protein folding. We've seen good successes in engineering. We've seen successes in experimental sciences, among others. And I'll talk about several of these. So the first highlight that I want to present is about a COVID-19 Supercomputing 21 Gordon Bell finalist submission. And this is the work to really understand the replication phenomena of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein with a human host. To better understand these replication transcription complexes and the protein-protein interactions, one really needs to bridge data among various scales. So on the left are data that we obtain from cryo-EM experiments. In the center is our fluctuating finite element analysis, which can really look at larger timescales, but is unable to do at an atomistic resolution. And the third scale that we bridge this is with an all-atom MD simulations. Now, the all-atom MD simulations really cannot sample at the scales that FFEA does, which is at least 50 times faster in just terms of physical timescales. But AMD provides you the resolution that you really need. So the key thing is that we worked here is to bridge this across different timescales here. And additionally, as part of this effort, we're trying to close the gap between experiments and simulations and provide a closed loop. That's the overall vision. So in this case, we use AI in several unique ways. The first approach in using AI is for the all-atom molecular dynamics. We use NAMD3 in this case. We are looking to really sample and search through a really large conformational space of protein-protein interactions. Some of the approaches that we've taken are using an equilibrium simulation. We have other sampling techniques that we've taken, and we've used a convolutional variational autoencoder to really look at the latent space of all the interactions that we see, and to really identify if using an outlier analysis to see if the interactions that we're observing has been already observed. In that case, we can stop these simulations. And we can also launch new simulations to search a space that we haven't seen before. So think about it as a very, as an intelligent sampling of a very large space. But what we really do here is we are optimizing it, optimizing the compute time, where we try to use the compute resources at hand to really look at a really large space as efficiently as possible. This is key for rapid responses or to really understand some protein-protein interactions, such as in times of COVID-19, where we can use as many resources as possible and span these and intelligently steer. So for this science, we use resources at ALCF, at the Oak Ridge, this is at OLCF. We use the systems at NERSC, and we also partnered with TAC to use a frontier system where we could collectively use all 4 resources to tackle this problem. So in addition to the AI that's used to steer, we also use a graph neural operator to really improve some of the inner loops of the MD simulations. This is still work in progress that we continue to work with our collaborators that include folks from UIUC, which is Urbana-Champaign, with folks at NVIDIA, Cerebrus, among others. So to provide you the impact on science, we've seen a 50x improvement in terms of time to solution, in comparison to just using an equilibrium approach. And additionally, the key we've been able to bridge 3 different insights, 3 different timescales. I'll provide, there is a link at the bottom, which really provides information to our the SC21 COVID-19 Gordon Bell paper, which is just been published at the International Journal for High Performance Computing and Applications. So I talked briefly about the convolutional variational autoencoder. Our goal was to really understand if we can speed this up. This was one of the time-consuming, I would say, bottlenecks as part of the entire workflow. And what you see here is as we scale on Summit, we have two different configurations, one with 523 residues. This is a smaller system, and we have another with 926 residues. And we're able to scale CVAE across Summit exceedingly well with very high efficiencies. You've been able to leverage close to 1,500 GPUs across Summit for this. And we compare the performance of scaling this on Summit with running this on the Cerebrus CS2 system. So on Cerebrus CS2, if you just focus on the 926 residues, we are able to achieve close to 4,700 samples. So this gives us an indication of the kind of scaling and throughput that you're able to achieve. So we can get around 4,700 on a CS2. On a single V100, we get about 51 samples per second. We've also run the same experiments on the Theta GPU, which has the A100 GPUs at ALCF, and we are able to get about 150 samples per second. So what you observe is you really get close to 100x improvement for the training on the CS2, in this case, with respect to a V100, and about 32x with respect to an A100. So if you were to look at a Summit node has 6 GPUs. So we are talking about a CS2 being able to deliver a performance which is approximately the same as what 16 Summit nodes can do, or provide you a performance which is similar to 4 Theta GPU nodes, where each node has 8 A100 GPUs. So this is kind of improvements that you can really get by using these AI accelerators. What we are looking today is our small systems in the million atom range. Where we really need to go is the billion plus systems. We already have data sets which are 6K by 6K in terms of residues. And these are significantly larger systems that we need to train. And we would really like to get a timely response to keep the entire workflow optimized. Again, this was a really, it's a really tight collaboration that spanned a wide number of teams, including at Berkeley, Oak Ridge, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, NVIDIA, Cerebrus, the TAC supercomputing systems, and we came together to really solve a challenging problem for COVID-19. So here's one example of how the AI testbed was significant and in making novel discoveries. I will next talk about an interesting science enablement on several other AI accelerators as well. Cosmic Tagger is a very it's a use case from high energy physics. Cosmic Tagger is used in high energy physics and deals with detecting neutrino particles and neutrino particle interactions in a detector overwhelmed by cosmic particles. And the goal is to really classify each pixel separately. So where we say either these are background pixels, cosmic pixels, or neutrino pixels in the neutrino data set. The data uses 3 different planes, and So we have multiple 2D projections that have to be coupled together. And it provides us a track for this 3D particle tracking systems. The training that we use here is a model that is used in various computer vision models, but this has been adapted for cosmic tagger in this particular neutrino physics application. The key challenge here is that if you look at the data sizes that you can collect today from the detectors, we really have to downsample them to run on the amount of memory that's available on the accelerators today. Also, I want to remind you that in future, we are going towards larger and higher resolution detectors. So this is a key challenge in this high energy physics domain. We compare the performance of Cosmic Tagger running on A100 system with the same running on a SambaNova RDU. The key architectural feature of the SambaNova RDU is that it has a really high amount of on-chip SRAM, and the accelerator has close to 640 gigabytes of DRAM as well. That's on the accelerator. This really helps us store larger images, run larger models, and we were able to run on the native resolution that's available today. And what you can see is you get much higher accuracy than what you get on running with the reduced image size on these systems. Now, this is really going to be important for science as we move forward, where we'll obtain data at much higher resolution as we upgrade various detectors. I would also I want to highlight that what we achieved here was the state-of-the-art accuracy that hasn't been achieved before. And we could really do it because we are able to look at the native resolution. Having discussed training in the previous two examples, I wanted to next shift some focus into inference. Inference is another key workload for us. One of the cases is to really forecast plasma instabilities in tokamak reactors. And a key goal here is to achieve inference in under a millisecond. That's the goal of the tokamak operators here. And so on the left, we compare the inference problems running on Grok, and we compare the same with the running on the NVIDIA A100 systems. We run both in FP16 in this case for Grok and on FP32 in terms of for NVIDIA. Another key insight that we really want to do is batch one. So as soon as the data sample is available, we need to be able to run inference on this. So this is a key insight that so that batch one performance is of importance here. What we observe from these from this data is that for a batch one, we get close to a 200x improvement with using Grok. And some of the key capabilities in Grok are I would say the architecture, as well as it has capabilities for I would say more novel data pipelines. And I'll highlight those in the next example, which is looking at large drug screening in terms of COVID-19. So here the goal is to really look at swiftly screening through 4 billion drugs in the data set in the database to effectively understand the SARS-CoV-2 virus and what kind of antiviral drug candidates can help battle this. At the time we were doing this study, we had several models that we wanted to run against the same data. And the Grok allows us to provide for the ability to run co-resident models, and you can have a data stream that can feed into several models and you can get the outputs. The ability to have co-resident models also provides us uncertainty quantification in this case. And as you can see, we are able to achieve a pretty impressive performance. On the left is performance with a V100, which is a baseline. We get about 1.7x improvement for with the A100, and we achieve 185x improvement over a V100 and close to 333x with FP16 on the graph card. So these are very promising results that we see for two very diverse use cases for inference in this case. So having talked briefly about different accelerators, what I wanted to start discussing next is science use cases where we've used a variety of accelerators and how they perform for these for these use cases. So the first use case I'll discuss is the X-ray diffraction-based microscopy, such as high-energy diffraction microscopy, which relies on the positions of these diffraction peaks with high precision. This is a key workload in, I would say, in light sources today. And these positions are typically computed by fitting the observed intensities in the area detector. And you take that and you use a theoretical peak shape, such as pseudo-Voigt curve fitter. And as these experiments are getting more complex, the data sets are getting higher resolution. The pseudo-Voigt is a key bottleneck here. So the team here, which is led by Zhengxin Liu, who's at Argonne National Lab and has worked with beamline scientists spanning APS, SLAC to really develop this technique, came up with BRAG-NN, which has achieved over a 200x improvement over conventional pseudo-Voigt profiling. One of the key challenges here is that the goal is to get really in situ and near real-time feedback, and they would like to keep up with the experiments over here. So high data rates and ability to really train at high speeds is a key factor in this case. So what you're seeing here is a comparison of using the SambaNova RDU, which is SN10 RDU, the Cerebrus CS2 system, which is labeled CS2, the GraphCore system, which is labeled IPU GC200, and the NVIDIA A100 system. So we look at the end-to-end execution time for training these. The dashed lines or the I would say the pattern lines signify the training time. And at the bottom is the fixed costs, which really depends upon reading from storage, pre-processing the data. And as you can see, different accelerators have different fixed costs. And this is again an indicator that as we take these systems and move it close towards as we work towards moving them more into a production facility, really understanding how the data storage for these accelerators or systems are designed is very key. As you can see, NVIDIA, which is on the very right, has amazing performance in terms of being able to load and process the data. This is because of the ability of using really fast SSDs on these DGX nodes and the ability to use GPU Direct. There is more work that needs to be done on the for the other accelerators. What you do notice over here is the training time, if you do a comparison, and I have a chart next, differs in all these cases. But if you just look at the end-to-end time, where lower execution time is the key for the science team over here, what we observe is that the SambaNova and the GraphCore system achieve the lowest execution time and achieve close to 3.7 to 3.4x improvement over the NVIDIA system. Cerebrus is able to get up to an 80% improvement over here. So again, this indicates that for the entire end-to-end pipeline, these accelerators are very promising. What I've done in this is I've taken the fixed cost, which were the IO time, and just plotted the training time. So if you just look at the training time, you can see that the CS2 achieves close to a 33x improvement over the A100 system, while the SambaNova and GraphCore system achieve a 6 to 11x improvement here. I would like to caveat that as part of the CS2 runs, it uses a multi-replica where you're having multiple replicas running. The Bragg-NN model is unable to really stress the entire CS2 chip. So we are able to run multiple of them on the chip. Again, just a reminder, it's a wafer scale engine compared to the smaller chips that you see that many of the other systems are built out of. So we have to run many more of these, and that helps us get a significant improvement for training. There's also, as we've seen in science applications, there are models that are large. Some of the language models, we need multiple even CS2s at this point. But there's a large number of science models where you can fit many of them on a single node. And our goal is to understand how effectively can you run these on the accelerators as well, because that is also an interesting use case in addition to running the really large models. So that was one kind of a comparison between the systems. I'll do another comparison using UNet 2D. UNet 2D is used as a very common computer vision model that we see in coming from light sources. And our goal was to really understand what is the performance of scaling UNet 2Ds, trying to understand as we upgrade imaging facilities or observational facilities where you get larger and larger images, or you start getting more at a higher frequency, how well do these accelerators perform? What you see here is that we've used two batch sizes, one with 32 and another with 256. And our goal is to, we are scaling the number of devices in this case. So we are going from one device from one device all the way up to 8 devices. Cerebrus is just one device because that's the entire wafer scale engine. Whereas in NVIDIA in green, the A100, the SambaNova in orange, and GraphCore in blue, we can scale out the number of devices. What we see for a smaller batch size over here, the CS2 achieves about a 30% improvement over, I'm comparing it with the 8 device configuration here. So we get about a 30% improvement over 8 GraphCore nodes or GraphCore accelerators. And we get about a 2 to 3x improvement over the SambaNova RDU and the A100. For larger batch sizes, we also see a similar trend. But what we do observe is an improved performance on the A100 because you're using larger tensors in this case. But we do consistently see as you go into larger batch sizes, the wafer scale engine in this case is it's more compute intensive. So it provides you much higher throughput in this case. We have discussed these. What I would like to next briefly talk about is the communication performance here. As we start building systems where we connect several of them together, what we are seeing in this figure is the performance of an all reduce, which is a very typical operation when you're averaging the gradients. And we go from 2 devices all the way to 16 devices. For 16 devices, we run it just using the A100s and the GraphCore at this time. What we observe is that the NVIDIA DGX-based systems that we have achieve the highest bandwidth, whereas we do notice a saturation for the GraphCore, which is at in blue, and we postulate, our hypothesis is that this is because of the internode communication that's taking place. So for every 4 devices, you have a node, and our goal is to look at in-depth profiling tools that are available. This is something that I'll talk more about. And you can also observe that if you look at the SambaNova as well as the Grok node, that there is more work to be done here in terms of optimization for network performance. So this is one key insight we have today. I do know that vendors are really working to get the performance on a single node, and now as they are building larger systems, that's where some of the focus is today. So what I want to pivot next is really talk about, we have these very powerful systems, but how do we really engage the community so that we educate users, we educate the wider audience to effectively start using these systems? So just as a reminder, we have taken the SambaNova and the Cerebra system are available for users for allocation, so they're public. And we are soon working with our other vendors to get them to get the systems to a point where we can make them available to our users as well. For our SambaNova system, we conducted a AI training workshop. This was just held earlier this week, where we had attendees from various national labs, industry, universities, several of the interns that are there, as well as from at Argonne, among others, all attended and got hands-on experience to really start thinking about how to use the SambaNova system and porting over. On August 1st, we'll be covering 5 different AI accelerators, all the 5 I mentioned, as part of the ASCAC Architecture Day. Last year, we had held an ALCF AI for Science training series for students. This was primarily targeted at undergraduate students from universities and graduate students as well. We'll be expanding the coverage of students that we have to, so that we embrace students from community colleges and HBCUs, among others. It's really key to train these students so that they can leverage the power of these accelerators. As we all know, they are the ones who will be using these systems and doing novel science on it. This fall, we'll be targeting the AI accelerator testbed as part of this training series as well. So in addition to learning how to use AI for science, the students will also learn how can we leverage, how can we learn about these accelerators, and how do we leverage these accelerators for our scientific AI application. We are having a Cerebra CS training that's planned for August. In addition to this, we have a tutorial that has been accepted at Supercomputing this year, which is about how do you program accelerators for scientific computing. And this is in collaboration with Cerebras, Intel, Habana, GraphCore, Grok, and SambaNova. So we have vendors, 5 different vendors who will be that we'll be working with who describe their architecture. We'll describe how to take models and put the same model across different systems, and we'll have some hands-on time. So I'm really excited and looking forward to this. In addition to what I mentioned earlier, we have an AI testbed expedition program. This is part of the Argonne LDRD. We had one last year where we had 18 projects spanning a wide variety of domains that leveraged the AI testbed to do novel science. The expedition projects really target Argonne-related AI ML science, autonomous discovery, or computational science areas where they can really make novel use of the testbed and enhance the collaboration that we have among the domain scientists. So as part of our the expeditions program last year, we provided approximately a 1-month support to the projects, and we had around 18 projects. This year we've reduced the number of projects to 11, and we're making it a more dedicated 2 months effort here for the PRs. So last year we had applications that targeted Sambanova, GraphCore, and Cerebrus. Here's a list, and they span a wide number of domains. And this year we have 11 projects, and again, they span the various accelerators that we have, including the Intel Habana Gaudi system that's there. Just as one highlight, Autophase NN is a self-supervised technique for coherent diffraction imaging. And we were able to take this model and train this on the Sambanova system. One of the key accomplishments was that as we work with these expedition projects, we realized new operators that we need to enable on these accelerators. So in this case, we worked with Sambanova, where we had FFTs. These are spectral images, so you need FFTs. We had FFT support. We had support for some really, I would say, custom loss functions, as well as support for some complex operators that were enabled. So the expeditions program really helped us work with our vendor team to also enable new and novel, I would say, kernels and functions that we need for scientific computing. Autophase NN during this expedition time was able to achieve a 39% improvement in training over an A100. This was using 8 RDUs on a node versus using 8 A100 GPUs on a DGX node. So this is significant an achievement in terms of in the short period of time they were able to port their code and were able to achieve this improvement. Autophase NN, which is a self-supervised technique, is one of the key workloads that we expect to run on these systems as part of the APS upgrade that's taking place. Having said that, the Cerebrus and Sambanova data scale systems are available for allocations. You could, you have the PDFs available. This is through a director's discretionary allocation award, which usually lasts for 3 to 6 months and is renewable. This is on a very rolling basis, and we get back to you in a week to 2 weeks once you make your request. Sending in and the allocation request will ask you about your science, the kind of models that you have, so that we can better target a testbed for you if that is needed. As I mentioned, it's a turnaround time of 1 to 2 weeks to get you started on these systems here. There's a link over here where I point you to the ALCF AI testbed user guide that provides you detailed documentation on how to really get started on each systems, how to run sample models, how to port, best practices, among others. So I'm going to shift gears and really talk about some ongoing efforts and then provide some parting thoughts. Today we are upgrading from half a rack that we have for the data scale systems, which is 2 nodes. We are scaling up, we have plans to scale to a 2-rack data scale system. Our plans are to procure a rack of the Bo 200, which is the latest generation from GraphCore, which is recently released. And our goals are to also upgrade to a rack scale of the Grok system that we have. Our vision is to take the GraphCore and the Grok system and the Intel Habana system that we have and make that available to the users as part of the allocations. And there are some steps that we need to work towards it. And I'll talk some more about it. We constantly work with AI vendors. We have weekly meetings so that we really push on the features that we need for scientific ML as part of their roadmap and their software stack. And it's been a good partnership where vendors have changed their roadmaps, really support our scientific use cases. We continue to evaluate new accelerators from a variety of vendors, and we plan to incorporate very promising solutions as part of our testbed. Now, as we work on these testbeds, we really want to provide a common scheduler. So we are working with PBS Pro that we use for our facility today to integrate all the AI testbeds as part of the scheduling complex, so that this makes it easier for users to use any accelerator and submit jobs on them. We have started evaluating traditional HPC. So think about these as the computation motifs and simulation codes on the AI accelerator. And there are SDKs that are available from few vendors that enable you to start quoting computational science applications here. And our key goal is to really understand how to take these AI accelerators. They have their own software stack, their own operating system. They have different kind of storage needs. And how do we push a vision over here where we can take these one-off systems that have been designed into a system that can really integrate with our infrastructure and be part of the national user facility. So that's the kind of push that we have over here. I'll kind of close with some of our observations, some challenges and insights where we've really seen good speed ups for a wide gamut of science applications. It's really easy to deal with reason with larger resolution data and to scale to multi-chip systems. Having said that, there is a lot of room for improvement. There is a significant amount of effort that requires, if you have to port applications, it's really improved over the past 2 years. I still know I had to program registers for one particular vendor, but it's really improved to support the wider deep learning stack that we see users have. Given these systems, the other challenge on these systems are the longer compilation time that we see. So if you take a large model, some of the compilation times can be range from half an hour to can even go to an hour and a half. So those compilation times really need to come down especially when you're doing a development cycle. The coverage of deep learning frameworks has significantly improved, but as we work with science users, we still need more effective support there. So here's where the relationship with our AI testbed vendors is really helping us to bridge this gap. I mentioned some about performance analysis tools. So something that we've seen lacking that we, coming from an HPC space, is we really want in-depth performance analysis and debuggers tools. This is really lacking on these AI testbed platforms. Vendors have them internally, but to make them usable by a user community, there's a significant gap that needs to be overcome. So getting these performance tools and debuggers would really help improve productivity here. And again, I talked about integrating all these AI systems with facilities. We've made some good progress, and we are able to bring the Cerebrus and Sambanova system as part of our production facility. But more work is needed in terms of the data storage stack. How do you effectively have robust operating systems that can span multiple AI test beds? Discussing about integrating with schedulers, among others. So there is there's more work that's being needed, but good progress has been made. One thing that we realized is training and outreach is extremely important, and it's really critical to educate users to effectively use it. I'm happy to say that one of our research aid and interns, Mansi Sakarvadia, who interned with us and really helped learn these AI testbeds, is now a CSGF fellow. She's going to continue, she's going to go to grad school at University of Chicago. And she was really excited when she saw the AI accelerators that are available and the kind of impact that they can have. She was able to take the auto CDI NN, autophase NN, and come up with a vision transformer and test that on our testbed. So, great progress comes when you really educate, train, and outreach students. In this case, she was an undergraduate student. Finally, I'll say that close collaboration is very much needed to realize the AI for science on these testbeds. Having said that, I'll conclude by saying we have a number of publications that have come out from these from the AI testbed, and I'd really thank DOE Office of Science for their support. And this work has been done by a wide array of individuals. It's been a collaboration and a team collaboration, both at Argonne, spanning multiple divisions, as well as the collaboration that we've had with our vendors here. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Venkat. I'll just make an editorial comment. Certainly, oh geez, it's been 30 years ago, but the testbed facilities that Paul Messina built at Argonne with early parallel machines had a profound effect on lots of people, because it was one of the few places you could compare software and architectures at a time of great ferment. So I'm really glad to see another version of that in the AI space. So well done. And with that, Mark.
Great talk. Thanks very much. And it's maybe too early for you to answer this question, but one of the interesting things I think for people in the broader educational and industry space is going to be how these new systems compete in terms of price performance. And the Cerebrus system, the numbers I've seen quoted for the first generation system were really rather high. And the challenge is going to be competing against mass market GPUs from a more specialized, smaller space. Is there anything you can say about that at this stage, or is it, or if it's too early, just say that. So, but that's
I would say that currently. From our point of view, we are evaluating these systems and really understanding the impact for science. But this is a very important question, and I'm sure the vendors are really thinking about this, right? They're in business, so that this is something that they would be concerned about. We're still evaluating this, so it will be good to have this discussion down the line.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
It's like, Tony Hay is online. He has a question, and then Rich, and then we'll go to Satoshi.
Hi, Venkat. Nice talk. Thank you very much. Very interesting. A quick question. You did protein folding and you also did tokamak control. How do your results compare with Google DeepMind's results with the protein folding, with AlphaFold, and with their latest stuff on tokamak control of fusions?
Oh, great question. And this is something that we are currently evaluating, where we are using AlphaFold and comparing our solutions with what we get from DeepMind in both of these areas. So this is ongoing work, and I'm happy to come back and give an update on these in the near future.
I'll come and get to you.
Wonderful.
Okay,
Thanks.
sounds good.
I know
Thank
will.
you.
Sorry, and then there's some more questions online, but go ahead.
Great talk, Venkat. For the disaggregated architecture that you alluded to or mentioned at the beginning of your talk, how would these accelerators be integrated? Would they be on node or really just in the fabric? What are some of the options that are kind of surfacing for that type of architecture?
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and this is kind of the key design point that we are looking for, and we are trying to tease. So, one, it depends on the kind of form factor that these accelerators are built. In some cases, these are PCIe cards that make it more amenable to installing them on a node. In other cases, they have their own, rack scale, which own chassis, as well as proprietary their interconnect. We foresee both, where you could build it as part of a node, or you could connect it on the fabric. So we have efforts today where we are working with interconnect vendors to tease the space of how should we architect these systems, and we're trying to address this by coming up with science-driven application use cases that really, I would assume that no one solution may fit it all. It's possible. So depending upon the science use case, how often they, how much data they generate, how often they generate, do they scale? We may have different solutions here. So we are working on different application-driven benchmarks that will help us tease these solutions. At the same time, we are working with vendors to really understand what's feasible and how can they either be disaggregated or be a more tightly coupled system. So these are questions that we're working on today.
Thank you. Satoshi.
Okay, so as I try to get a general observation of the inherent advantages, disadvantages of these accelerators versus some more general purpose architecture like GPUs. So of course, there were some form advantages, and I'll get to that. That's part of my question. And the disadvantages, of course, the software ecosystem, which also leads to relatively poor performance on things like I/O and networking for, let's say, doing a very large data parallelism that you alluded to, which I think are very much understandable results. But with respect to the performance advantages, is it correct to assume that most of the advantages coming from, let's say, running a large model, the inherent capacity of local memory that's differentiating, let's say, things like GraphCore and or Seminova as opposed to, let's say, A100 GPUs. With respect to Cerebras, it's a different kind of ballgame, except for the fact that since it's a wafer scale integration, so it's only fair to compare that to, let's say, our multi-node configuration of a GPU with a similar, let's say, chip area, and if I do a comparison like 30 A100s or let's say 10 upcoming H100s, it's not going to be that different because inherently, let's say you have a single DGX pod H100, given the data that NVIDIA is giving out, it's very likely it'll match the performance of CS2. So, but comparing like chip to chip, as you alluded to, because we're comparing a silicon of a similar footprint. The advantage that GraphCore and Seminova enjoy, again, is that have you tried to figure out where the performance advantage is coming from, and try to pin down the advantage, which I speculate to be coming largely from their larger local memory footprint. But have you done analysis to figure out where exactly this is coming from?
Okay, now this is a great question. And so as part of our ongoing work, what we're doing is we have a wide number of kernels. So instead of looking at the entire apps, we're looking at a number of kernels of different shapes, sizes, sparsity. And what we are comparing is, we're trying to do a comparison across all these systems, where we're also looking at different memory capacities as part of it. To some extent, what we what we are working with our vendors is on exposing some of the performance analysis tools so that we can better understand these bottlenecks. In some cases, we have worked with the vendors to make their, I'll give you an example with Samba Nova. Now Samba Nova has the Samba tune available, so you can really reason about performance over here. How the graph was laid out, I would say how effectively these units were used. Similarly, in case of GraphCore, we're seeing some more effective tools, and across the board, I would say this is improving. So there is good effort there that we are seeing for a wide variety of kernels, where we are reasoning about the key insights. I would say that the ones that you alluded to in terms of sticking to SRAM or staying on chip helps. The way the graph is laid out is really, really key. Is something that we've seen. So we have looked at options where can you do a quick and dirty compile versus a more effective compile. The things that we've done in HPC are turning to be all very important. That helps us really understand how the data is laid out, how it's flowing, how the utilization is there to make these apples to apples comparisons. Satoshi. So,
I think it's formidable you doing that, and in HPC a lot of the major portion of the understanding of particular code can be shrunken down to performance of the kernels themselves. So it's a collection of the kernels, right? Mm-hmm. So would it be correct to, in experience, would it be correct to try to characterize these performances in terms of, let's say, like deep bench like kernels, these microkernels, and then trying to conjoin these kernels to arrive at a performance estimate, which will be kind of consistent across different types of hardware.
Yeah.
And
so
try to figure out where the performance.
I would say that deep bench. I think at the notion is this is what we do in HPC, right? Satoshi, you're the guru here. So from notional level, yes, that's what we need to do. Question is deep bench the right? Deep bench was more catered towards what's from enterprise workloads, and we have to drive this from I would say shapes and sizes that we see in science, which are really not part of deep bench. So that's the direction that we're pushing.
Okay. Yeah.
Even looking at various sparsities, among others, are where we are pushing here in this case.
Yeah. So it'll be great if if the community can derive a set of these sets of kernels that are more amenable to scientific workloads. That would be representative of the workloads we'll be running. And then it'll be a fairly simple matter to run these across the hardware and then, just arrive at performance estimates, and the combination of these kernels will give you these performance.
I agree. And that's a direction that we've been working on today.
Yeah. And then, the concerning thing about these deep learning accelerators that I'm sure that NVIDIA's and AMD's and Intel's are figuring out that the increase of internal memory, it will be the key to performance gains in these large models. And once they do that, all the advantages of these customized chips will just go away, right? Yeah, so, yeah. So I'm a little bit concerned about but you know, as much as I like to try to support innovations by these small companies, you know, if the advantage is just coming from the capacity of the internal memory, then once people start doing 3D integration, then all the advantages will go away.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful that these vendors have looked at some innovative hardware. So they may have other tricks up their sleeve to come up with new innovations in terms of architectures and keep pushing vendors. The best thing for us is as we want to deploy systems that really benefit science. And I'm glad they're all pushing and being competitive here.
So we're running a little bit behind. So there are two, I'm going to give Karen the floor and then Vit, and then we will thank Venkat and move on to the last presentation. So Karen.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Venkat. Really wonderful accomplishments, and I'm so happy that we have this test bed. My question is on energy. So what is being done within the test bed first in terms of assessing the energy consumption and running these? There's been a lot of recent works on basically stating some of the energy consumption associated with these big training models and what we do about it. And what are your thoughts on that? And what are some steps that can be taken, to learn from this test bed in terms of increasing energy efficiency, reducing energy consumptions of these workloads?
Yeah, Karen, this is a great and very important question. And let me tell you, this is one that that Valerie Taylor is always asking me about the energy efficiencies of test beds, and it's very near and dear to me because on the Blue Gene Q and on the Theta Nice landing system, I designed an energy monitoring tool that could scale out and really understand energy consumption and came up with ways to even balance energy between different parts of the workflow. So this is a very, I would say, near and dear topic to me. We are really pushing the vendors to, they have internal APIs. We're really pushing them to make this open. We can also monitor energy at the rack or the node level. But what we really want to do is ensure that we have enough sensors on the chip itself that provide us I would say enough of a monitoring capability here to understand this. So this is an ongoing dialogue with the vendors, really push them in directions that we really want to see there. And vendors are very open to this. And I'm hopeful that some vendors will open up the APIs that we can make available to get very fine-grained profiling information there.
Thank you. Fantastic. I think this is a really good place where DOE and Argonne in particular can be a leader. So I think this is could make this a high visibility type of effort. I think it would be great. Thank you.
All right, Vent, you get the last word.
I can't hear you. Yeah.
Guys, for that.
There you go. I can hear you fine.
That was fun, though.
Yeah.
So this presentation raises a couple of meta questions for me. At Google, of course, we've spent a lot of time developing new hardware for machine learning. One thing we discovered is that the learning phase requires more precision than the operational phase does. And so you could distinguish between two different kinds of hardware for that purpose. Second thing is that the design of a multi-layer neural network, the hidden layers and how they're interconnected have a great deal to do with performance. And exploring that space turns out to be hard. I mean, as far as I can tell, it's very manual. And so it'd be very interesting to know whether there are any automatic ways of exploring the design space or the interconnections among the hidden layers. And I think I'm sure, I'm no expert here, but I'm sure that there must be some work going on there. And then finally, we mentioned yesterday, of course, the federated learning question and how you combine results from independent models. So this is all very healthy for DOE to be exploring, I think.
Indeed. These are great questions. And if so, if you look at let me start off with about the precision. So we have if you look at most of these vendors, they have support for 32-bit. They have highly optimized support for 16-bit and lower. There are certain vendors who actually can support up to, I would say, 90 bits precision, which is great. So you can do, operations if you need that range over there. We will see, the kind of workloads that we have targeted today in science, spanning, both simulations as well as from experimental science. We are very, very particular about the accuracy for training. So as we look at these models, we, I would say that the first thing that we do is we either run it on a CPU or a GPU to ensure that, to look at the accuracy metrics. And as we run on these hardware, we are very, we want to either replicate those accuracy metrics. That's very key for science. In future, we might see vendors adding additional precision support as well. So this is a topic that we are able to look and make good progress, as you saw, for training in a variety of scientific domains, as well as for inference. I do work with one team that requires 64-bit and 128-bit precision for training, and we would have to definitely use different systems for them today. Now talking about being able to reason about scaling, it is a challenging problem. Let me tell you that. So the compilers that these architectures support provide you the ability to go to multiple chips on a node. So you can really reason about a model that can run across multiple chips on the node, and it takes care of the data movement between the chips. So that's how the graphs are laid out. Now, the question is, when you go from there off to the network, you have to deal with contention on the network, or you need dedicated lanes that can guarantee some performance. That is an active area of research for various vendors over there. The jury is still out on how effectively can they scale to multiple systems. I do know that there are vendors who have solutions in the space already tackling this. So I'm looking forward to trying them out. I know Cerebrus is trying to scale out, so is Sora, Graph, and GraphCore, Sambano, and Habana are all having solutions in the space. They're trying to do, one approach is to use their own dedicated network or interconnect between these, which they can control. The approach that we really want to see is, instead of having a separate interconnect for accelerators versus a separate interconnect for some of your other computation, are there ways to really come up with virtual lanes that they can coexist on the same interconnect? So that's an effort that's ongoing today, and we're working with interconnect vendors.
All right, I think, Venkat, we're going to need to leave it there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
All right, the last presentation, Mike and Todd are going to give us a software tech update on ECP. So Todd, you're going to drive from up there?
Mike's going to drive.
Okay,
I don't need my laptop.
all right.
Very good.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, nice to be a part of the meeting. Sorry, I can't be there in person. So yeah, let's get started. So we're going to give you an update on software technologies first, acknowledging the roughly 250 people who contribute to this effort, starting with the leadership team of the software technology area. And then the leaders of the 35 staff member or sub-projects that we have as part of our portfolio. So what do? We deliver tools that you know about and care about, and some new things. And so I won't go into this in detail, but the key point here is what we're providing is a software stack that enables performance portability across all the leadership platforms, specifically across the 3 GPU targets, NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel. And so that's an important part of what we're doing under ECP. We're contributing to a large collection of applications that are part of the ECP portfolio. This just shows our dependency database and the dependencies that the applications have on the software technology libraries and tools. And what you can see here is, on average, there are 12 critical dependencies per project on the capabilities that software technology provides. And so the work that we're doing is leveraged across a lot of situations, and it's very meaningful. And this is just the ECP applications. There's a much broader collection of applications that also depend upon and will depend upon in the future, especially as they move to GPU architectures, on the capabilities that we provide. Just a couple of 3 examples here. The COCOS project is a performance portability ecosystem that enables people to write code and then compile to several different architectures. In this particular case, the XFEL project used COCOS and then was able to go from the NVIDIA GPUs to AMD GPUs with very little effort. Audios is an IO library and has made a big impact on WDM app. And then Hyper, a multi-grid library, has been able to invest in new algorithms and implementations and impact the ExaWin project. There are a lot more of these success stories in the upcoming AD assessment report. It's actually just being polished right now, will be available soon. And there are a lot of other success stories for software technology and co-design, which is also a collection of libraries and part of this KPP3 performance metric that we have. So KPP3 is a capability integration metric, is what we have to satisfy in order to succeed as a project. There are 4 KPPs in ECP. KPP3 is one that governs the software technology and co-design efforts. And basically, it's integrating a capability, an FTE years worth of work, into the client environment and doing it in a sustainable way. We have identified how many we need to do, and then we have to achieve 50% of the weighted sum of those. We interpret capabilities as in a broad way. Yes, it can be a library that integrates into an application, but it could be a tool that's used. It could be into the facilities environment. It could be into the community ecosystem, such as LLVM or OpenMP or OpenACC, or into the language standards. Just to show you that we're involving a lot of really talented people in our review, this is a list of our SMEs that we've engaged as part of this. This is a standing committee of people whose job it is to help us succeed and assess the quality of the work that we're doing. This is some of the dashboard capabilities we have. The key one is one I just snapshotted this morning, which is where we are relative to our threshold. So we have to achieve a threshold value of 34 integrations, weighted integrations. We're sitting tentatively at 32.5, and we are predicting that we'll achieve 66. So we're in good shape in our assessment of where we are in the project. I'll set up a little bit about what Todd's going to talk about. There's a good book called Working in Public by Nadia Eghbal. She goes into software platforms, which are digital environments that intend to improve the value, reduce the cost, and accelerate the progress of the people and teams who participate in them. In other words, to get better, faster, and cheaper, all three. And we have two types of software platforms within software technology. One is E4S that you'll hear about, and then the software development kits, which are domain-specific, collaborative, and aggregate product environments. And so now we'll transition to Todd. Todd, I'll drive slides for you.
Can you hear me, Mike?
Can't hear you, Todd.
Hello? Hold on. No.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So thank you, Mike. I am Todd Munson. I am the control account manager for the software ecosystem and delivery portfolio within the Exascale Computing Project.
I still can't hear.
It's
All right,
local.
then yeah, just use one of those. Yeah.
I could hear him fine.
So I will just sit here and we'll pretend that I am on Zoom and it'll be awesome.
All right,
So-
you ready to go, Todd?
Yep, I will let you know when to advance. So the software ecosystem and development portfolio inside of the Exascale Computing Project consists of three basic activities that are going on here. One is the development of the software development kits themselves and the regular releases of the extreme scale scientific software stack. And that's an effort led by Jim Willenbring out at Sandia National Laboratories. We also have the underlying technologies that are used to deploy and deliver the software in this packaging technologies area led by Todd Gamblin out of Lawrence Livermore. And that area includes the SPAC technologies as well as our efforts in container technologies. We have a new effort in Exascale workflows, and this is led by Dan Laney. And what they're tasked with doing is developing a software development kit for scientific workflows, and they do a lot of community outreach. I hope in the future to be able to provide more information on the activities of ExaWorks, but for today, I will be focusing on the software development kits and the packaging technology efforts. Next slide. Just as a reminder about what is going on inside of the software technologies area inside of ECP, software technologies and ECP is split up into a number of thematic areas. Those thematic areas include math libraries, visualization, and programming models, among the other ones. And what we do in our development and deployment strategy is we assemble those software components in these thematic areas into software development kits. And the software development kits is sort of the level where we get involved and answer questions like, what does it mean to be a numerical library? How do we interoperate between numerical libraries? And it also allows us to sort of use those synergies in the thematic areas to talk about interoperability and how we want to deploy the software for those particular thematic areas. From those thematic areas, we integrate all of those software development kits together into this notion of E4S. So E4S is the extreme scale scientific software stack itself. And that's our mechanism that we go and assemble all of the software technologies together into this common software stack that we build, test, and deliver to the facilities and to users themselves. If you go to the next slide. So E4S itself is a SPAC-based curated distribution of software. It's regularly tested for interoperability and portability across many architectures. It's available to users in both source code, containers, and binary caches, and also in the cloud. And it's really an open source effort. So it's open to contributions from external parties, not just from people within ECP. And the latest release, E4S, was in May of this year. And that release included over 100 full release products from the Exascale Computing Project. There's a lot of activities that go on inside of E4S. For today, I'll focus on 4 of those activities and just give you an update on what impact some of those have. I'll start off with the build caches, and then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about our testing and validation test set. And then I'll go into the community policies and the doc portal at the end before transitioning back to Mike. Next slide. So we have reproducible builds for all of E4S, and those builds are customizable. So what we like to say is that we build and test E4S, the entirety of E4S across all of the architectures, so that you as a user or a facility can select those packages that you want to use and have confidence that they'll be able to be built and run on your particular system. We provide base images and recipes for building on Docker. The current release includes support for a number of different operating systems, as well as versions of those operating systems and different architectures, including the x86 architecture and the PPC64LE architecture. As part of this effort, and then to improve the performance or reduce the time it takes to compile all of E4S, we maintain a build caches. And those build caches are used for both the bare metal and container-based installations of the ST products. Anybody can go and take a look at those build caches, and if you follow the link, you'll find everything that's available in the build caches for right now. This build cache model is extensible to other architectures, and it can also be managed by the facilities and staff when appropriate. If you go to the next slide. The current build cache contains about 88,000 different binaries at this point. I checked that yesterday, and it's a little bit over 88,000 binaries at this point. A side benefit of using the build caches and maintaining those build caches is the impact that we can have on the applications themselves. Within ECP, I'll mention 3 applications where we've demonstrated sort of significant improvements in reductions in the time it takes to actually build the applications. Inside of the WDM app application, which is a Fusion Plasma application for the whole device modeling system. By using the E4S caches, we were able to reduce the time it takes to compile the application by 10 times, so an order of magnitude reduction in the time it takes. In the EXA Wind project, in terms of concrete time, it used to take about 4 hours to build the application from source code, and we get it down to building within 6 minutes on using the build caches. And if you go to the next slide, there's also a Pantheon project that we work on with people out at that we work on. The Pantheon is a very complicated application that we're able to build using the E4S containers. Again, it's a complicated application. It includes many of the ECP products, and it's providing some in situ analysis examples. Here, we're also able to obtain a 10x speedup or an order of magnitude reduction in the time it takes to compile the application just by using our build caches. And what this means for users and application developers is that they can spend more time on their science and less time on compiling their codes, which is extremely important and beneficial and improves their productivity. And so that's a side benefit of the build caches, independent of whether or not you use all of E4S. If you go to the next slide, where do we go and build those machines, or how do we test those builds? So we test the builds using our validation test suite. So we provide a test suite to validate both the container environments and the products. This is a fairly comprehensive test suite, and it's called the E4S validation test suite. And you could go and obtain the source code or look at the different tests that are available in there. We automate the builds and we run the tests using architecture-specific spec recipes, and then we use that to populate a dashboard. Where do we run these tests? Well, we run these tests on both the TDS systems, the test and development systems for Aurora and Frontier. And we also use a machine, well, it's not a single machine, but a farm of machines out at University of Oregon called Frank. So Frank allows us is dedicated to non-NDA hardware and software. So this is all open and anybody can go and use Frank without having any NDA requirements. But we try to get as close as possible to the architectures that will be deployed on Frontier and Aurora so that software developers can go and use these systems. Frank includes a lot of different architectures and configurations of machines. So we're able to test E4S and all the software development software technologies on all of these different types of architectures. So if you go to the next slide. This includes both IBM Power 9 chips, Intel chips, and AMD chips for the CPUs, as well as various configurations of Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA GPUs in all kinds of different configurations across the system. Another advantage to using the Frank system itself is if you're doing very low-level software work, sometimes that requires changes to things like the BIOS that you would do on a production system. And we're exploring opportunities because we have Frank that we can actually go and do that on a smaller scale and enable the developers of those low-level software to run and test their products on the Frank system. If you go to the next slide, I wanted to bring this up. This is a snapshot of a small part of the dashboard. So if you go to dashboard.e4s.io, you'll be able to obtain much more information about what's going on with E4S and the status of it on the dashboard. This particular slide shows our status on Crusher, which is the TDS system for Frontier, on several of the programming environments themselves. On the left is some of the software packages, things that are pretty critical for deployment on Frontier, including Cocos and many of the numerical software libraries. And then on the top is the various programming environments that we have available on Crusher, from the Cray programming environment with ROCm 5.1 and a GNU programming environment as well. As you can see, we have a lot of packages available on Crusher at the moment. Not everything is available quite yet, but you can monitor the status, and this automatically gets populated and updated as we make progress on the delivery of these packages on the TDS systems. All of the results on the Aurora TDS system are still under NDA, so you won't be able to find them on the sheet, but we do maintain some results on those that are behind a firewall. As part of E4S, if you go to the next slide, as part of E4S, we have a commitment to quality improvement in the software technologies. Our quality improvement initiatives are centered around the E4S community policies. These are meant to enhance the sustainability and interoperability of the software technology, and they serve as a criteria for full membership inside of the E4S software stack. Now, the E4S itself is very inclusive of a lot of packages that are not full members, but if you want to be a full member of E4S, you have to support the community policies. These are modeled after the XSDK community policies. Those are the policies that were developed for the numerical libraries over the last many years. And this was a multi-year effort that was led by the software development kit teams across ST, and include many representatives across ST and multiple rounds of feedback between leadership and the members of the team. As you might imagine, many of the policies are things that you would expect from quality software, including documentation, error handling, and testing. If you go to the next slide, so during our last round of reviews for the software technology projects, we asked the software technologies to do a gap analysis of their assessment against the E4S policies themselves on whether or not they supported the policy, partially supported policies, or did not support the policies. And this was an interesting experiment because we did not have a requirement for them to go and change their software or become more compatible with the policies themselves. However, the teams, being the teams, software development teams, and fairly competitive, they went and they looked at their gaps. They found that there were some gaps that were easily fixed. And so right before the reviews, we got a flurry of activity to go and make sure that we satisfied as many of them as we could. And in particular, this led to a lot of more improvements in the E4S validation test suite and a lot more validation tests inside of the test suite. If you go to the next slide, the last thing I wanted to highlight is that as part of the community policies, there's a collection of metadata that needs to be provided by the software technologies. We go and scrape this metadata on a regular basis, and we use that to produce a doc portal, which is your one-stop shopping location for obtaining information about all the software technologies that are supported. It includes all of the E4S products, and it's searchable and sortable, and you can go and find out more information about it by visiting the doc portal. And at this point, I will turn things back over to Mike, who will tell us more about the value and impact of E4S going forward. and a software support model.
Thank you very much, Todd. Really nice. So just to kind of a leave behind slide on E4S and SDKs as platforms. I think these platforms will become even more important as we go forward for a lot of different reasons and the value that they provide. These are not zero cost entities to belong to. So certainly we recognize that teams have to see value, but that's part of our effort, is to prove the value of what we're doing with these portfolios and platforms. I want to talk a little bit about our user support model. There are 3 phases. One is before we had E4S, we wrote libraries, we wrote tools, but by and large teams would, who are at one facility would focus on the libraries and tools associated with that facility, say the same lab. People at Argonne, ALCF would tend to use libraries and tools that were developed at Argonne. And so other facilities, other users, yes, there was some use, but it wasn't as robust as it could be. What we've been able to do with E4S, the DOE E4S team, is we've been able to aggregate and integrate the libraries and tools and make sure that they port to all the facilities and that all users have access to them and can get access to the documentation, like the doc portal that Todd just mentioned. And that's been great. That's been a huge improvement. More recently, we've been able to introduce a commercial E4S support team. So this is an experiment we're trying. We put out a call for a proposal bid, and a small company, Paratools, was able to respond and provide the capabilities that we requested. And so now we have this commercial entity, Paratools, that provides tier 2 support for our users. And so they support users at the facilities. If a user has a problem, they of course first work with the facility staff, but if that staff member can't resolve the issue, then they turn around and they go to the E4S support team. And that team will either fix the bug if they can, often they can, or they'll work with the product team to resolve the bug, but they take ownership of shepherding the resolution so that the user gets the support that they need. What's also really nice about this approach is now there's a commercial company involved. And so if you're at another agency and you want to use E4S, you have the opportunity to acquire services from this company. If you're at a company that wants to use what we provide, or any other entity, you can now work with this commercial company to provide the kind of support that you need, that we as developers within the DOE can't necessarily do. We certainly want to help people as we can, but we can't do it in a way that gets you all the way to where you need to go at times. And so we view this as a very positive experiment, and so far it's actually going quite well. So just to summarize, what we've done in these kind of 3 phases is before ECP, the primary scope of the use of a software library or tool was at the local facility. There are many exceptions to that. I'm not saying that's universal, but it was really a local cost and benefit type of approach. Introducing E4S allowed us to then share costs and benefits across all DOE facilities, and now introducing this commercial E4S component truly allows us, I think, universal shared costs and benefits. And we see this as a natural evolution, in taking the software portfolio as an important entity that it really is. I want to talk a little bit about software sustainability activities, and this is actually in response to our 2021 independent project review recommendation to work with OSCAR on software sustainability. So a couple issues or topics in this area. First one is we established a series of town hall meetings we call Leadership Scientific Software LSSW meetings. We actually have one coming up, the last of this year's series, next week on Thursday, July 28th, and we welcome you to come. You can go to lssw.io to get information for how to sign up. It's a virtual meeting via Zoom. But these meetings have been very helpful for us to gauge and scope and brainstorm about what the future of scientific software, leadership scientific software could be. The next thing is a workshop that we hosted in December of last year on the science of scientific software development and use. In other words, using scientific method to understand and improve how software is developed and used for research. The brochure from that workshop is out, and we're working on the workshop report. We came out with 3 priority research directions: develop methodologies and tools, develop next generation tools, and really these are real. The focus of these 3 PRDs is team impact. How can we improve team impact? How can we improve a developer's impact? And then how can we improve societal impact by making sure that our results are trustworthy as they depend on software? Then in the cross-cutting themes, we had 3 of those, both human and technical elements, and then workforce recruitment and retention, and then expanded partnerships, collaborations, and impact. And these PRDs and themes actually resonate very well with our broader discussion. Many of these have come out in the conversation over the last 2 days. And so I mentioned this workshop because I think it moves us in some good directions, and it allows us to use a scientific lens for improving how we develop and use software for research. So some takeaways from this impact are, introduction of the commercial support for E4S makes broader benefits and cost sharing. Other agencies and industry can use E4S with confidence because they can acquire support. And then using science to inform our efforts in scientific software, I think, is very important. All right, I think this is the last major topic, and that is software sustainability or a software sustainability organization scenarios. Again, this is part of our effort to address the 2021 IPR recommendation on software sustainability. So we're taking some information and that we have from our experience in ECP to try to come up with some tools to reason about how could we go forward in what we're calling an SSO, for a brief term. And these are, in conversation with OSCAR, in conversation with laboratory leadership. This is our thinking on it. So this is not necessarily what OSCAR will do, but it hopefully will help inform decisions that come about. So we made some assumptions. First is that we want to manage our libraries and tools as a portfolio. That we want to do aggregation at the 2 levels of the SDKs and E4S, that we want these to be high quality products, that as new domains come into our scientific software efforts within DOE broadly, that we can also incorporate them into whatever an organization would be, in addition to evolving modeling and simulation. And that we want to transition what we provide to community or vendor stacks if possible. In other words, we need to make room for new work by making sure that stable and mature stuff can find a home elsewhere. And then also, it's something what seemed like a great idea, but it didn't work out, and after some amount of time, that we have the ability to sunset things that didn't reach critical usability. And we're calling this thing, as I said, the Software Sustainability Organization for the purpose of this conversation. We identified some activities for portfolio managing. First of all, you need to identify, emerging needs. You need to be able to select, and then you need to be able to retain existing efforts, and then transition things either to another ecosystem where it can be more easily sustained, or again, off-ramp if it didn't work out the way you had hoped. There are lots of people who are involved in these kinds of decisions, and exactly how those roles are evolve, we don't know. The basics, I think we understand based on our experience so far with scientific software within DOE, but I think it'll take time to work through the details. And as we get experience, these roles and responsibilities will also probably evolve. We're looking at, for lack of a better term, what we call a hub and spoke model. Hub meaning that there's a core capability of managing the software ecosystem. Also, it would involve the science of scientific software, so that we're always improving the craft of how we develop and use software for research, and that we call the hub. And the hub would also provide feedback to, say, the sponsors of products, so that they could assess, is this good work? And then the sponsor of it could use our input to determine, should we continue with this, or, can we adapt it? Can we, improve it? And so it allows some information coming from the hub to the sponsors. The spokes then can be a collection of products. You can organize them by the sponsor, by a technical area, or a variety of other things. Lots of opportunities for how we could do this. And of course, then there are multiple stakeholders involved here with distinct and overlapping roles and responsibilities that we need to determine as we go forward. When we looked at the portfolio of software technology, we looked at identifying 4 layers of activities. There's one is this ecosystem, which you can think of as the hub. We put into that the leadership team, our software quality assurance efforts, software R&D, and then the leadership over E4S and SDKs and the infrastructure around that and integration. And then we looked at our teams that are doing development, software development. Some of that work is hardening and delivering it. So that's another layer. And then another layer is porting and optimizing, taking existing code and porting it to a new platform and optimizing it for that platform. And then the final one, and usually the bulk of the largest piece, is developing new capabilities, new functionality, new algorithms, so we broke our efforts into these 4 kinds of layers in a way to give us kind of price points, that we could use to determine, well, what could be in a software sustainability organization, or what would you put out into the broader ecosystem. Taking our ST budget, our software technology budget, we derive some ranges of price points for this, hardening and delivering, per product, port and optimize per product, develop capabilities per product. What we observed is that, based on the novelty of the new system, this price could also vary. And then, we just put out, 4 different scenarios. Let's say you want to support 50 products in this software sustainability organization. There's a base ecosystem that sets at $10 million based on what we're doing within ECP. And then, hardening and deliver would add 6.3 million, same port and optimize, develop capabilities. So you can kind of see the various price points, that you could tune this to. And again, this is notional, but I think it helps us see, what the possibilities could be. The other thing we did is we tried to understand, well, how would this software sustainability organization then fit within the DOE OSCAR ecosystem, within OSCAR Research, SIDAC, and then facilities that already exist. And one of the things that we observed was we think that this kind of software sustainability organization would actually fill a gap that has been historically part of OSCAR efforts and technology readiness levels. So that's, I think, that for us was the key takeaway from this page here, is that if you look at TRLs, 1 being research oriented, 9 being real production stuff, there's an opportunity with this SSO to elevate our technology readiness level for the things that we're working on in OSCAR Research and SIDAC, and then in collaboration with the facilities. So summary. Using a portfolio-based approach for HPC software is about going together versus going alone. We enjoy working with each other. We see tremendous value in the collaborations we've been able to establish with ECP in particular. Our products vary a lot, right? There's a lot of variety in what we have in our portfolio, but really we have the same frontiers, these evolving demands and systems. There's a lot of sharing that we can do. Success on the frontier is important for all HPC configurations. We actually do a lot of our work on laptops, and that's an important element of the work that we do. And then we, as I mentioned, by collaborating and sharing is how we get progress. And we can get better, faster, and cheaper in net. And that's the overall value proposition of what we're trying to do. E4S has enabled for us new relationships with facilities, vendors, apps, and industry. and other U.S. agencies and international partners. I just list a couple of the kinds of things that we have going on. We have E4S is available on AWS, Google Cloud, soon Microsoft, and they actually give us free cycles because they want their software to work with our software. So they actually see our software as a leading edge test vehicle for their software. We take contributions from the vendors, other agencies. We've started conversations with NSF, the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, so that their SI2 program, which is about software sustainability as well, could look at E4S as being the integration target for their software, which I think I'm really excited about. We could actually start talking about a national leadership scientific software stack. We've also mentioned, and just briefly, that how we develop and use software is an important scientific effort in itself. In other words, we need to continue to improve the craft of scientific software development and use for research. And then, ECP has given us a chance. Roscoe mentioned, that we had this time with ECP to bootstrap a portfolio-based scientific software ecosystem. We're very encouraged by the potential for a post-ECP funding opportunity, and we're excited to look at expanding our partnerships to include U.S. agencies, industry, and international partners. And I think that's it.
All right, thanks, Todd. Thanks, Mike. That was a whirlwind.
Yeah.
So questions? Yeah, Ben.
I show my ignorance again. What is a SPAC? I thought it was an investment, but obviously.
Todd, you want to take that one? You're in the room. Go for it.
It's certainly not Bitcoin. Let's go with that. So SPAC is a SPAC recipe is basically a recipe on how to build a particular piece of software. So and that's basically what it is. It's a way to describe your software, how to build it, and all of its dependencies.
Yeah, Roscoe.
Yeah, an amazing response to some of the things that we saw earlier, and a giant proposal. I can't wrap my head around the whole thing at once. One question I had, though, is I understand with SPAC and E4S and the system software that came out of ECP, how that directly and
you lost your mic.
In the existing and in the proposed model, but I was asking where the boundary is, if I understand things correctly, to things like research software developed by application teams that get used by a somewhat bigger community, but maybe not DOE wide and so on. And where does that fit in? Maybe that I just didn't see.
Yeah, it's a great question, Roscoe. So the co-design, I think the co-design projects are probably good proxies. Is that Tim Gurman sitting right next to you? Yeah, there you go. So co-design is a part of the activities we have going on. And actually one of the LSSW town halls was focused on exactly that topic. What can we do to improve and make more accessible these application specific reusable capabilities that are not so broadly used, but could still benefit from say hardening and documenting and making available to a broader audience. So I think they're part of a spectrum. A little bit closer to the apps, not so close to the universally usable, but it's an important part of our conversation as we go forward.
Any other questions? Just looking online to see if I've missed anything here. All right, lots of progress made and some really great stuff there. So Todd, Mike, thank you. Well, that brings us to all over but the shouting. So any parting comments from anyone on ASCAC? All right, any parting comments from folks online? All right, then as my grandfather would say, let's go and sin no more. We're adjourned.